I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. All right, starting with the agenda, we have, and up here on my screen, all right, we've got the COVID-19 response update first.
Okay, so just want to touch on a few things and kind of get some feedback also from the board on some different items. The first thing we want to talk about is we said we would revisit the fitness center opening to the general public, as we continue to move forward. Now that the YMCA has now been open, and people are asking, when are we going to open the fitness center? It seems to be pretty low risk for us, and Tracy will talk about the specifics, but the reason I say it's pretty low risk is we never really have very many people at any given time. So right now our recommendation would be to open the fitness center to the general public come July 6th as well, as we've done with our other stuff. So Tracy, I don't know if you want to speak to the specifics.
Sure. So what we're looking at is maintaining the same guidelines as the county right now, that it would only be 10 people inside, and then asking that members wear masks to and from, that there's some additional disinfecting that members would participate in, as well as our fitness center staff. Fitness center staff would be asked to wear masks at the check-in and check-out desk. We'd be monitoring and encouraging, we'll be having the machines set up already from Raider Elite, so that we have some of the machines closed off so that people can socially distance or physically distance during their workout sessions. And then also any of the equipment that is like the kettlebells and bands, all those things would be deposited with the check-in, check-out desk, so that they can do additional disinfecting of any of those pieces of equipment as well. But looking at what the CDC recommends and other fitness center guidelines, we would just be following all of those. And we're looking at getting staff trained this week before opening up. We were already planning on opening up to students next week, but we're asking for the consideration of expanding that to community members. We'd also be making sure, they sign in and sign out now, but really making sure that we're collecting times when they're signing in and out, so that we're able to assist with any contact tracing if need be.
Let's go ahead, Heather.
So Tracy, I'm sorry, revisit. So the with masks, we would be, you said something about masks to and from. I know the Y is encouraging people to wear masks while they work out, but not requiring it. Is that what would our?
So we're asking that they wear their masks as they come in and out. So when they're more likely to be closer to people, as they, when they're at the desk, at the check-in and check-out desk, while they're working out, probably the least, well, I shouldn't even say that. So when they're, I was just trying to think, when I walk the track, I'm not necessarily walking or running the track. So, but we would ask that people physically distance if they're on the track, so that if they're able to physically distance, then they wouldn't be required to wear a mask while they're working out. And then we also have a note in there that if they're working out with household members, that they wouldn't be required to wear masks when working out with household members. Staff would be wearing the masks all the time at the check-in and check-out desk. Go ahead, Rob.
So Tracy, with regards to the cleaning of the apparatus and what have you, certainly it sounds like it's a bit of an honor system, but how do we confirm that people are actually doing it?
Well, as far as members coming in and cleaning, that's an expectation, but staff will have a cleaning log that they need to keep track of. We had that before all of this, that they were required to fill out a cleaning log, so we knew exactly what was being cleaned each night. But we would continue to do that here as well.
Given what we're facing, how confident are you that we would be able to maintain the cleanliness that's required to open the
I am confident with the group of staff that we have right now. I mean, we have a committed group of folks. It's, you know, it's ebbed and flowed, and so it's not, I think there's been some reference at previous meetings that, you know, these are kids, they're not kids. Majority of my staff right now are adults with second jobs, and are very responsible. So I'm confident that they're going to follow through with the expectations that they're given as far as cleaning.
I mean, if you say they're competent and you're confident that the cleaning will be done, I'm confident it'll be done as well.
And we'll also have, so the fitness center staff will certainly take care of that period of time while we have people there, but then there's the additional cleaning that facilities and grounds does each night. We'll also have at least an hour of time, probably more, between when Raider Fitness kids finish and the fitness center opens, so that there's an expectation that there's some additional cleaning. We also had hand sanitizer dispensers placed as you go into the fitness center, so that we're going to be asking that as they come into the fitness center, they use that, and also as they leave.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm still just a bit bothered by the not even encouraging to wear masks. I think about like on the track, and if people are running, you know, I think the CDC data that I've seen in the Harvard Med School are what, like 6 to 14 minutes is how long droplets remain in the air. And if you're running on a track, you're breathing even more heavily than you usually would. I'm not saying I want to run with a mask on either, but you know, it's for indoor spaces. That part worries me a bit. I mean, limiting it to 10 people will help somewhat with that, but I don't know. I'm curious, like Jamie at the Y, they're encouraging masks. Is anybody wearing masks at the Y while they're working out?
No. Well, when I shouldn't say it so quickly. 1 in 10, I would say roughly 1 in 10 are wearing masks. No one that is on a treadmill or walks the track wears a mask.
And I will say historically now, and I don't know what the numbers are going to be like when we open up, but when we have people up on the track, there's probably, you know, maybe there's 4 people on the track at a time. And it's a big track, so they're spread out quite a bit. I mean, that's when I've been there. And if we're limiting the number of folks to begin with to just 10, because some people are not coming to be on the track, they're coming to use the strength and conditioning equipment.
And just additionally, if I might just throw in there, there's some evidence that would suggest that exerting yourself wearing a mask, even if it's breathable, is dangerous in that you can breathe back in your carbon dioxide pretty excessively.
Do you need a motion tonight?
Bob had a question.
Yeah,
what Dave mentioned is exactly why I never work out, see, is because of that. No, my question would be, I know we had talked about increasing the air changes in the building. I know there's a lot of questions out there. Is that actually good or bad? Have the air moving around more? What are we just going to run the air systems normally as we would during the year, or are we keeping them ramped up?
Our plan would be, as we're able to run basically 100% fresh air with the systems. It's going to be more expensive, obviously, because you're going to be heating or cooling. Basically, you're going to be tempering more air than you would typically have to. But our plan is to run more fresh air than what is required by code in all of our spaces, not just the fitness center space, but in all of our buildings.
All right. I think Carrie had a question about a motion.
I can wait. It looks like Rob might have another question.
Okay, so Rob, go ahead.
Question for Nick. You know, publicly, as we look at the news, and certainly our public is paying attention, what are we doing as it relates to filtration in our buildings? You know, apparently there's some filtration that might be out there that could help us with, you know, this coronavirus. Just curious to know from a public perspective, what might be going on that you can share with the public.
You know, right now our buildings have been pretty locked down. Obviously, we haven't had a lot of people in them. But yeah, you know, I could talk to Jim more about it. From what I've been reading about it, is a lot of those systems that they're claiming provide additional filtration for coronavirus, things like that, are not as effective as they claim, and that there has been little to no evidence that running our normal systems as we have our normal filters and things like that wouldn't be effective against the spread. And so, you know, I know some districts are buying huge UV systems and things like that, but there's been no nothing that we've read that has taken us to the point where we would want to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in upgrading those systems. Because right now they're just saying by just having more fresh air in the buildings is really the best approach that you can do right now. So, and like I said, our recycled air is filtered. It runs through our filters and things like that, but they're not HEPA filters. I mean, it's not a hospital. We don't run to that standard. But just by sheer, you know, bringing in the additional air, we feel like we're in a pretty good spot. But I can talk to Jim Stasko some more about it and get back to you guys about that as well.
Yeah.
Sue?
I was wondering, Nick, are we experiencing any pressure from the community, or Tracy, any pressure to get this open on the 6th?
Tracy, I'll yield.
Well, we do have inquiries, and you know, I think it will, as you've already approved us to open it up for students. So once students are in there, it's just going to, I think it will be more people interested in coming in because they'll see that people are in there using it, and so we'll have more questions about it. But yes, we have people who are interested in coming in to work out. Summer's a time when we have a lot of college kids who want to use it. And right now we can't, based on what you approved previously, they would not be able to use it either.
All right, I had a question, Tracy. So if it's a limit of 10, is that limit for total for both the lower section and the upper section and the track?
Yes.
It's 10 in the entire
Yep.
section of the.
That's
and
what
that includes students?
That would be during fitness center hours. It would be, so students would be considered members like anybody else. And so it's a total of 10 at any given time.
Okay.
And that may change. I mean, you know, the name of the game is flexibility. I mean, we may find that, okay, it's going to be no more than 10 in the upstairs weight room, no more than 10 in the downstairs weight room. You know, you know, right now we are trying to take a pretty conservative approach, you know, on some of these things. Some people might say, well, you know, you have, 20,000 square feet of weight room and track space, and you're only going to let 10 people in. Well, we're trying to ease into this, you know, a little bit, you know, as the governor said, kind of turning the dial, so to speak. So that's kind of what we're thinking. We rarely would have, Tracy could speak this. I can't imagine when we've ever had more than 10 at any given time all that often.
Correct. We're, you know, when everything closed down, we were at our higher numbers, but even at that, I mean, you're spreading, 50 people out throughout the whole evening when we're open. So, you know, as an example of having 50 people come in there during a shift. But yes, to have 10 people in there was unusual.
And if I can add to my answer to Heather's question earlier, when it comes to the YMCA, I would say, when they reopened, they did not have any concerns about a flood of people and pushing their reduced capacity numbers. I would say currently they're operating at somewhere around what I would typically see in at 20 to 25% what I would see at that 6 a.m. hour pre-COVID. So there might be 10 people in their entire upstairs, which is a very large area. And I think what it is kind of self-regulated. There's people who are just not comfortable working out for the reasons that you mentioned about people breathing hard. I know when I walk past the treadmills, I hold my breath until I get to the other side. But that's, I think, kind of what you're going to get from folks is some self-regulation. And they'd probably prefer to work outdoors at, if they're going to get a workout in, they'll probably be outside unless, it's too hot. But I don't know. Is anyone comfortable with then giving the green light for the July 6th? Is there a motion? We probably should have a motion since we did on the other opening of facilities in some capacities. Carrie.
I would move that we reopen to the public on July 6th.
Second.
And I assume that that's going to be with guidelines as imposed and enforced by administration.
Correct.
Okay. All right. All those in, is there any further comments? Okay. All those in favor of the motion to reopen the fitness center to the public on July 6th, say aye.
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 Those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
The ayes have it, and we'll reopen. Is there more now for the COVID-19 update?
Okay. Yeah, actually, that was just kind of the first part of it. What I sent you about a week and a half ago is kind of how we're attacking our planning and all the different decisions that are needed to be made related to COVID. We intentionally delayed some of these decisions because we want to see what the DPI guidance was going to be. I know there are some districts that have really tried to get out there and put out their plans and then are now having to maybe readjust. And so we are in the process of working through that. The guiding principles, that's a document that I shared with you guys before. Essentially, as we talked as a cabinet team, as we think about these decisions, what lens do we want people to look through? Because if you look at all of the different decisions that need to be made, there's a lot of different folks involved in that decision-making process. And so, really, we believe that curricular, extracurricular, co-curricular experiences are vitally important to the well-being of our kids. I mean, that's something that, I think our administrative team believes, I think the board believes, otherwise we wouldn't offer these things in a school district. We also believe that there's a need to educate the whole child. And in order to do so, we need those face-to-face interactions. And we've seen that. And I think some of the studies that are coming out are showing that although we will do virtual when we need to do virtual, we know that it does not supplant face-to-face. I mean, and really trying to make sure that we're considering the socio-emotional, the academic well-being, the physical and mental health needs of our kids, having them in front of us. We believe that providing opportunities for kids not providing opportunities for kids can be detrimental long-term. And we believe it's our responsibility to mitigate risk and take that responsibility seriously, but we can never guarantee a COVID-19 free environment. I think that's a big one, as we look at all of our different decisions we make. We're not looking at it through the lens of, can we do this with 100% assurance that nobody could potentially catch a virus or have some type of risk of things. I mean, we couldn't do that in February before this all, exploded. And so we really are trying to be intentional to talk about. It's about mitigating risk. It's about putting reasonable things in place for kids and for staff. We want to move a little bit away from the word safely or safe, because it gives people the connotation that, you know, they can go into this environment and they have no worries and they can kind of let their guard down and it's risk-free, and we just can't do that. So really it's about mitigating our risk, you know, for our kids and staff. And the last thing we want to consider is, you know, we want all these decisions to be made through these kind of 8 guiding questions. And Dave kind of started with these questions and came up with them when as a cabinet team. We really thought these were a good set of questions. And so what's happened and what you've seen in the different documents is you've seen a list of all the different decisions and the target dates in which we want to make decisions by. And then you've seen the document also that includes who's going to be involved in that decision-making process. And it is pretty extensive. There are a lot of people. It's everything from our school nurses to cabinet members, to principals, to other administrators, to assistant directors, to teaching staff. You know, so there's a variety of different people depending on the decision. And so we want to make sure we're kind of looking at things from all the different angles as we kind of work through this stuff. And so I think that, you know, that's important for you guys to understand that that's kind of our thought process. And there's so many different decisions that have to be made. There are some things that obviously become less vital to make sooner. You know, talking about what are we going to do for fall conferences is not something that parents need to know right now, but they're going to want to know things like, you know, what is going to be our mask expectations? You know, what is going to be our PPE expectations, things like that. And so we're working through that process. And once we kind of work through, you know, a lot of these decisions that talk about opening school and what that looks like, essentially what'll happen is we will be bringing it back to the board. And our plan is to provide the board with a plan no later than July 20th to make a decision on, yes, we're comfortable with you guys opening schools under those conditions with those parameters, understanding we're comfortable with the risk that we're going to have to take, because there's going to have to be some risk taking, obviously, until, you know, there is no COVID, and that doesn't look like that's going to happen anytime in the foreseeable future. So our decision date and, you know, what we're going to be putting out to parents is, you know, July 20th is when we're going to want the board, which is about 3 weeks from tonight. 4 weeks from tonight is when we're going to want to start to make some decisions. 3 weeks from tonight. Sorry, keep going back. Go ahead, Rob.
So with regards to just parents in general, I've been asked on a handful of occasions where, just from an information standpoint, where are we at? Is there something that we can share? You know, parents are struggling a little bit with not knowing anything directionally. And so if there's a way to share with the public, where are we at, and whatever we can provide to our parents probably would help them plan a little bit as well. And the other question I have a question with regards to education. Are we going to be able to provide any kind of virtual learning? You know, there are private schools and perhaps public schools who are helping their students in a virtual environment, but actually providing a classroom environment. Curious to know where discussions have been in that regard.
Yep. So a couple of things. So we do have on our website all of our communications that we put out, and our last communication that we did put out was on June 10th. And so, and then all of those folks that are going to be engaged in Raider Elite, summer school, all of those programs, that communication has been going out as well. We've also been working on a template that for all these different groups, once we kind of get past the initial summer school push, where they're going to see a pretty similar announcement of what to look for, whether it be fall sports, whether it be, you know, band camp or whatever these different things are. So we're pretty consistent that way. This week, we are pushing out our survey to parents to get some feedback from parents as well. And so we would anticipate that going out, you know, by the end of the week, so that we're going to get feedback from parents. on a variety of different topics. Just trying to pull it up here, and I can. So once we get that information, from parents, that will also help some of our decision making as well, because we do want to get their feedback. We want to know what they're thinking and their thoughts are. We know that, I believe this week, we had quite a few school districts that were getting ready to send out parent surveys and getting feedback. We've had some school districts that have already sent out parent surveys to get feedback and starting and things like that. But our survey is going to be everything from, if we have in-person school starting September 1st with reasonable mitigation practices in place to reduce risk to students and staff, would you consider, or would you send your child to school? And so, that's kind of a big question for us. Where are parents sitting? We're also going to ask the question, given the context of the current pandemic, which model would best fit your needs? And it's everything from 100% remote learning to alternate days or alternate instruction to 100% in-person learning to I have more than one child and I have different needs based on the children. And then we're also going to ask questions. I would feel comfortable for my child to attend school if, and there'll be things like they can check all the above. Student wear masks, staff wear masks, class sizes are staggered. What kind of things would they like to see us do, or what would help with that comfort level on some of these things? We're talking about the blended model, Rob, that you alluded to. We will provide a virtual option for kids that either cannot come because they have medical related issues or parents don't feel comfortable sending their children to face-to-face instruction. So we haven't flushed that completely out yet, and Dave's working on, and we're all working together on that. We will be asking about busing and transportation. Has your child utilized it in the past? Would you utilize district transportation, so we understand, where we're sitting with some of those things. Also questions about extracurriculars. And then we're also going to ask some questions about food service, the cafeteria. I think the question is, would you be comfortable with your child eating lunch in the cafeteria, even if we cannot space kids 6 feet apart? So we get a feeling of where are our parents at. I know when I talked to Somerset, they have 900 families, I think they said, in their district, and they had almost 800 responses to their survey. So this is one of those surveys you get a high response rate. They were running 95% of their parents were saying we want in-school instruction every day. New Richmond was running close to that same type of thing, and so I would anticipate we'll be close to that. I think originally we were thinking that maybe we'd be closer to 80% that would want in person, but we'll know more once we get that feedback. And Tracy has some introduction to the survey that people will read. This is kind of, we've already talked to you about what was your experience like with virtual. We already got that feedback, from people, and Dave's been processing that with his team. And so now it's really about the logistics of coming back to school. Where's people's comfort level, and how we're going to work through that. So parents are going to see that in the next couple of days. Go ahead, Dave, or Rob.
So just from a parent's perspective, if there's a way to, in that communication, just share maybe a bit of a timeline. We're doing a survey and we're doing all of these other things to help us with planning, just so parents are aware. I think that might help us quite a bit.
Yeah, Tracy and I can work together on that and put together kind of even highlighting the date that I talked about tonight, that, our expectation is we'll have a plan to the board, you guys to be able to make a decision by July 20th.
Nick, I would echo, I think what I've actually heard from more parents in the last couple of weeks, I think, than I've heard maybe in 3 years. But I think what I'm hearing, they're not aware of all of the work that you and your team are doing. And I think when you shared that decision document with us, for me, that was a real wow, where you just go, oh my gosh, this is really complicated. So I don't know, I probably don't want to share the decision document, although maybe, but what I wouldn't want is for this communication to go out and for parents to think that we're saying Well, as we start getting ready to think about what we're going to do this fall, we'd like your feedback. I mean, so I think the more, I know one parent I talked with over the weekend said the last time I heard from the district was in early June, and it was getting my feedback about online learning, and I haven't heard anything since. You know, I mean, so like that because there's that void of communication, I think they aren't aware that you guys are all working like 60 hours a week trying to get these 3 multiple plans together. So I think the more that we can front load this with, wow, have we done a lot of work? And to your point, Rob, any definitive dates that we can share with them so they know, like, okay, so by August, whatever, I'm going to have the information I need to plan. I think just a lot of parents are feeling like, we have a lot of parents who plan things really far ahead for their kids. I mean, I think this is a community where people book their kids' summer camps in November. And so to be coming into July and feel like they don't know much about September, I think is really uncomfortable. So I think the more that we can share with them about the intense amount of work that's been done by you and your team, the better going into this survey.
Absolutely. And I think where parents are going to have to be a little bit, because we typically put out information way ahead of time on just about everything we do. And in this case, we've tried to take the approach of putting, I don't want to say just in time communication, but because this is such a fluid situation, we've been trying to give this thing as long as we possibly could before we finalize stuff, just from a standpoint of, it's just changing. Like, for example, when we're on a call with public health today, they had 17 cases in St. Croix County over the weekend. And so it's all of a sudden, it's kind of been spiking in St. Croix County. Prior to that, I mean, we were averaging, 1, 2, 3 cases a day. And now all of a sudden, so it has been intentional that we haven't been putting some of the stuff out. And we've been waiting. We've been told for the last, 3 or 4 weeks, the state's coming out with guidance. The state's, and they finally released that last week, and we've been reviewing. But we absolutely can do a little bit more in-depth letter as it talking about some of those things as the kind of the cover letter for our survey. The email that goes for our survey, and we give them kind of heads up. Go ahead, Rob, or Carrie had her hand up, I think, earlier too.
In our district's defense, I've been sharing with people that the district can't just move on its own. We're waiting on the Department of Public Instruction. We're waiting on our county health commissioner. We're waiting on CDC. There's a variety of different organizations that feed into the decisions that are made. We can't just work autonomously, which is unfortunate, but it's been part of the process as we collectively learn more. It feeds into the district, and then our leadership has been able to make some decisions. And so, Nick, on behalf of you and your administration, you guys.
Carrie has a question.
All right, Rob, you went mute there for the last 3 sentences, but I think you were starting to give credit to Nick's team. So, do you want to finish?
Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I had an update that Microsoft decided I needed, but
Okay.
Just for the amount of all the different organizations that feed into the decisions that our school district has to make, you can't work autonomously. And so thank you for your leadership, your administration's leadership. It's certainly hard, but thank you for the information and the communication that you'll be putting forth in the near future.
I'm going to go Carrie, and then Bruce, and then Bob.
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, you're good. All right, Bruce.
Yeah, just a couple of quick points. So I think the other comments that were made are spot on. I think also having that drop dead date, because clearly with this fluid situation, there's things changing all the time. So I mean, all the planning and work that you're doing right now could clearly change, even right before the week before school starts, if a large spike happens. So I think just making sure that we're keeping that communication consistent. To that end, curious if there maybe would be a link that we could put on our webpage where we just put regular updates out there and have anything else COVID related, where people can go back and reference it. Because I think oftentimes, Sarah and I joke about it, because we may see something get posted on Facebook, like, have you seen anything on this? And it's like, yeah, there was an email that was sent out and it was all detailed in the email, but not everybody takes time to read through those emails. So I just think having something that's regularly updated, but also maybe even having posts available out on the website at HSD, where people can just click, here's my COVID update, and I can go in and take a look at that. And Tracy, I'm guessing that's not a small amount of work, so I'm not trying to put more on your plate, but just kind of curious, because there might be something that's, a central point to send people, hey, if you wanted to see something on that, just go take a look at hsd.com and or raiders.org, and you'll find that. That's it.
Absolutely.
Bob, you had a question?
Yeah, I was just going to add that I know we seem to be getting judged a lot out there by what other districts are doing, and not that we have visibility into, the whys and the hows and the differences that allow that to happen. I think the perception too is that I'm hearing that, well, there's this pushback against DPI, like we're using DPI guidelines or as a crutch, in that we don't have to follow them; they're just guidelines. So if we're going to use, rely on DPI for advice and what we can and can't do, I think we really need to voice that so our parents and community understand. Because I think it's almost looking like a negative recently from what I'm hearing. And obviously it is not law, but there are reasons why we don't want to be trailblazers and regret it down the road. So.
Okay. And Heather, you have another comment?
Yeah, well, or a question maybe. I know one thing for folks who maybe are on the more conservative end of being worried about sending their kids to school, and I don't know if there is an answer to this, but are there a couple of metrics that we watch that we would say, if the number of this gets above this? Because what I've heard is, what's our plan for going back to school? And then what's our contingency? Like, how do we know when we would pull kids back out? So if we have any, I think if we have any, measures that we know that we're going to be watching, to share that with parents, because I think that would make people more, set them at ease. If we're watching the number of new cases in St. Croix County, and I'm making this up, and we say, if we ever had 3 consecutive days of 50 positive, something, so that parents who want a little bit of that control, like to know that there's something we're watching that I can pay attention to, and that makes sense from a public health data standpoint. And again, I don't know that measure exists, because I realize it's complicated. That would be reassuring to share with the folks who really want that structure that informs our decisions, who want to understand the structure and the data that inform our decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, the state has just come out with those dashboards for each county. And they look at trajectories, and they look at burden on the systems. And we actually spent some time talking about that with public health today, saying, okay, what does it look like? And do we want to have a countywide approach to this? And one of the things that we got back from public health was, okay, things might be spiking in the Hudson School District, City of Hudson, Town of Hudson, but Glenwood City might have nothing going on. And are we really going to shut down, Glenwood City because things are spiking in Hudson, and vice versa? Things might be spiking in Glenwood City and not in Hudson. And so really the complicated piece is, right now, the statewide dashboard, it's actually tied to zip codes. From what I understand is what Kelly, I think, explained today. And so we're trying to figure out what that looks like. And then, based on those metrics, whether it be the burden and the trajectory, and then also we want to look at potentially the hospital capacity or hospitalization capacity. What are going to be our thresholds? We did just start talking about that today, because we've been waiting for this data set, because we don't want to create our own data set, but we're really, it says things like low, moderate, moderate, and high as far as trajectories or burden. Can't remember which one it is. And so what we want to put some things in place to say, okay, if we hit this level, according to this measure, this is gonna trigger this decision. And that's what we just started, public health has just been starting to put that together on a certain level. And like, for example, she told us today, the highest rate right now, the increased rate is 20-year-olds, the 20-somethings. That's where almost all the spikes are happening in St. Croix County, the 17 cases over the weekend. And it happens to do with probably the nightlife, related to, going out and not social distancing. So she just wants to be careful that all of a sudden, because we have, Glenwood City may not have the same level of capacity to handle things, that we're not closing down the rest of the county because one part of the county is having a spike. So it's almost like breaking it down even more. So we will have those things laid out as part of the plan. The one thing we don't have, it's just right now, there's just kind of two measures in there. It's basically burden and trajectory. But we also, want to know, is there anything else we should be watching? We've been asking, I would say, for at least 3 or 4 weeks, when you are making decisions based on to go from gatherings of 10 to gatherings of 50, what are you looking at to make that decision? Because we would like to, we'd like to look at that stuff. And I would tell you that it's a very ambiguous answer, that we're kind of hearing. And so our goal is to be able to put that in place and have that be part of our plan that says, okay, if all of a sudden we move into a high rate and high this, okay, that might trigger that we're going to spend 14 days doing all virtual. The caveat to that, as Kelly talked about, is so you could have, let's say, 40 new cases in a day in St. Croix County, and none of them need hospitalization, and none of them, over half of them might be asymptomatic. And so then she says, are we really going to shut things down because it's not putting a tax on our healthcare system? And so it really is a balancing act. And I get where they're coming from, because they're trying to, when the state decided that they're no longer going to make universal decisions, it did create, although it gave great autonomy, it created a lot of murky water for all of us. And we're trying to get, every Monday I ask the question, what should that matrix look like? And we're still waiting on that. We're still waiting on a response.
Well, I do hope, Nick, that one thing we can communicate to parents, I hope this is the route that we would take, is that they should have contingency plans in place. I mean, I know in March, there was the debate about, do we wait to close or do we close right away? And there was a strong feeling about, well, we need to give parents time to make plans. I would hope that this time around, it could be we're closed now sort of, like that the expectation would be that parents would have made some plans and that we wouldn't have to wait 2 days or 3 days from the date when we thought there was a real concern. So I think that could be part of the communication as well.
Absolutely.
Any other questions or comments?
So, which kind of brings us into some of the challenges that Tim is going to talk about, and Andrea, as it relates to COVID hiring. And Tim, one of the things we talked about is, if we're going to have to do all these additional things, we may need additional people. And Tim, I don't know if you want to talk about the custodial side of things.
Sure. Yeah. So as Nick mentioned, we're going to, obviously we're going to be going into deeper cleaning during the school year. And we're going to do that during summer school as well. And we're not going to be able to accommodate that with the current staffing. So we're looking, and Jim and Nick and I have discussed this a little bit about what additional staffing might be needed there. And so we're looking at somewhere between 9 and 11 additional facilities people. And they'd be going around during the day. Those people mainly committed to just cleaning, disinfecting light switches, faucets, bathrooms, door handles. It's a lot of effort to get everything wiped down and to keep doing that during the day. So, and roughly, if we looked at the cost impact of that, we'd be looking at roughly, if it's 10 people, it's about $650,000. That's all in, that's benefits, wages, et cetera. So.
Okay, Rob?
So if the average custodian can handle about 40,000 square feet in a shift, being how
It's about 30 to 32 roughly.
okay. And so if it's 30 to 32, you're adding about 11 people. So how many square feet are we dropping from 30 to 32 to what?
I think what we see, I had a number in my head at one point, Rob. I think they're gonna cover because it's only 10. Let's say it's 10. So they're gonna be, with what they're doing, they're able to cover more square feet. So we'd be, I think, yeah, I don't have a number of square feet exactly off the top of my head, but they're able to cover more square feet with what they're doing faster than somebody that's, cleaning a classroom, going in and wiping down desks, moving desks, sweeping floors, et cetera. So they're able to cover more square footage. That's why the number is less.
I mean, $650,000 is significant, and certainly we want to be safe. From a community taxpayer perspective, are there, standards, or is there some kind of comparable that you guys use to come to, the square footage per person, or this number of additional people, or how did we come to this number of people?
We've used, for the roughly the 30 to 32,000 square feet per person for regular cleaning. That's kind of a standardized process that we've looked at benchmark measurements. So this one's pretty new. We haven't really benchmarked anything.
So Rob, real quick, I talked to Jim a little bit about this today too. I mean, it's everything from, when you think about, so there's going to be an expectation probably that our staff are going to spray down desks, at different times throughout the day, with a spray bottle and then a rag, to kind of, to keep those things. So as Jim was talking about, Nick, we have to go around every night, collect all of those rags. Those all have to be laundered and then put back in classrooms. All of those spray bottles have to be filled and put back in classrooms, on top of wiping down door handles and things like that. And so when I talk to Jim, he's basically figuring, okay, how long roughly is it going to take somebody to do that per classroom, and starting to kind of estimate about how much time it's going to take. And it is a lot. It's a big commitment, and it's $650,000 is a lot of money, and it's based on, when him and I had talked, and Tim had talked, was based on the recommendations for what they want wiped down, how often they want things wiped down. This is what, based on Jim's 30 years of experience, this is what he thinks it's going to take in order to make it work. And if we find that, hey, we have too much, we're running out of stuff people do, we can back that off. I mean, we can, we have that ability to do those things. But right now, originally, the original number that Jim came up with was 17 additional staff members. And I kind of looked at him and go, I just don't think that's going to happen.
No.
So
how many custodians do we have today?
How many custodians do we have today? What do we have? 60?
Upper 60s. Yeah, that's daytime, evening, and third shift.
Go ahead, Sue.
I'm just waiting to hear more things from Tim Erickson. I think that nitty gritty can be worked out with an established person like Jim Staysko, and I think you've got a good plan. I don't need to know, how many minutes they're in a classroom, or all the granular stuff. So I'm anxious to keep moving. It's gonna be a long night.
Andrea, did you have something I think Nick alluded to?
Yep, I do. And so this is more just making you guys aware of a few staffing issues that we're starting to have conversations about, but it's a very preliminary conversation because we don't yet know what the fall is going to look like, right? We have all these COVID meetings, all these decision-making trees that we have to get through, but some issues that are popping up quite a bit. So like bus monitors, the potential for having bus monitors on some of our more full buses, because if we're unable to maintain the social distancing of, 6 feet apart, every other row, one person per row, that's about 12 kids on a bus. And we just don't have the capacity to do that. So what may happen is the combination of, whether it's masks, whether it's assigned seats, we're looking at all those options. But to go along with that, the DPI has been clear that they don't want the bus driver to be managing that. So then we'd be looking at bus monitors, some kind of individual to be on those buses to maintain that those things are occurring, because again, the likelihood is that we're not able to maintain those social distancing expectations of 11 kids on a bus. Similarly, just want you guys to be aware that some of the issues that we're struggling with is like substitutes in the fall. We know it's a matter of time till there is probably some implications or some staff that become sick, and then what? Because we also are very concerned about our substitute pool shrinking dramatically, because we do rely a great deal on our retirees to come back and sub, and they're in a higher risk category. And so we're just trying to be cognizant of that, wanting you guys to be aware that that's another issue we're working on. And then the last one is certainly the use of FFCRA leave. We've talked with the board before that, we're implementing FFCRA. Staff certainly have every right to utilize that leave, whether it's the, taking care of a child because of the no daycare or because of personal health situation. However, what does that look like for our classrooms? So if we have staff members taking intermittent leave because they do not have childcare for their children, that could last quite a bit of the school year. And so what does that look like for our kids who may not have that consistent staff member? And so these are just, we're trying to start brainstorming, and we have, again, these work groups that are established, that Nick is together, that we are starting these processes. I just didn't want you guys to be surprised if there's other costs that are going to be coming down the pipeline now because of us working through these different issues.
Any questions for Andrea? And Tim, did you have anything more to add? I mean, other than the cleaning staff?
No, that was it for now.
Carrie had a question, James.
Mr. President?
Yeah, Carrie.
Andrea, on the bus monitors, I'm assuming that's a hired position rather than parent volunteers?
Yeah, that's what, I mean, we haven't explored it too much yet. It's, but yeah, my assumption is that we'd first look to existing staff to see if we're able to increase hours without hitting overtime. And then we'd also look at, hiring some temporary employees. But we're kind of going into this whole situation thinking that it's probably going to go through the 2020-2021 school year. Hopefully not after that.
Okay, thank you.
The last thing is the board had made a decision to do these Zoom meetings through the end of June, and then talked about potentially always having the option of Zooming in, but potentially starting face-to-face meetings for those that want to come in. I just wanted to bring it up. Does the board want to continue down this Zoom route for our next two meetings? Do they want to have the hybrid so that we do then open to the public with the proper social distancing starting at the next meeting? What would you guys like to do, just so we're prepared to handle it however you'd like to handle it?
Yeah, Rob?
Well, just looking at the YouTube stream, it appears we have 13 people following us. And comparatively, when we have our in-person meetings, I think, we have fewer people participating. I'm good with keeping it this way, or perhaps doing a hybrid. But just from a viewership standpoint, it seems as if we have more participation leveraging this route.
Just so you know, I have it up on my screen. I think Tim Miner has it up, and I think Ryan has it up. So 3 of those viewerships might be people that are currently on our call, just making sure it hasn't gone down. So just as a heads up, but whatever you guys want to do.
4 if Rob's streaming as well.
I'm in.
Heather's cat was streaming too, but not anymore.
Yes.
No.
Yeah. Is there any other questions or comments from board members on that issue?
Well, you guys
I
gotta
just
get,
would-
I think we had recommended a hybrid before, like, you know, people want to go in, they can go in, but keeping the Zoom feed available. I thought that was what was recommended last time. I would move to do that. And those that feel comfortable in July for our meeting, you know, come in, and those that don't, and maybe you can just do a quick poll. Tim could send out a question to see who plans to be there in person and who's going to be calling in via Zoom.
no, and that's totally good. The only difference is typically we don't broadcast our work sessions. It's usually our regular meetings that are on TV or broadcast. And so the question would be, if we continue with the hybrid approach, would we then allow guests to speak if they show up in person? Because right now all of the comments are written or recorded comments ahead of the regular meetings. So we would go back to a public comment portion if we were going to have a location where there was going to actually be a physical location. So that was just kind of the thoughts behind it.
I think having a public comment portion for the board meetings, the work sessions, as our usual, would be recommended, or at least I would suggest that.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch all that, Bruce. You cut out a little bit, but just so you remember, we do the the public comments typically are at action meetings and not at work sessions.
Correct. That's what I was suggesting.
Okay, good. And
Yes, the one thing I
think-
caution, and a couple of you saw this in action, the Hudson Daybreak Rotary Club tried its first hybrid meeting this week. It wasn't great. So just to kind of think through the logistics of how we set up the room. And I mean, yeah.
Absolutely, Heather. And, you know, we're working with Ryan and Tim, and we'll do some dry runs of this, and we'll have to limit obviously microphones and who's talking and things like that. So absolutely, we'll do some dry runs. We want to make sure that it is successful. So our first go of it wasn't overly successful either. If you remember our very first kind of hybrid that we did, we had, I think, Jamie and I and Tim Miner in the room downstairs, and we were trying to record the recording, and yeah. It was a challenge. Okay, so we will set up for hybrid meetings starting at the next meeting. So we'll be ready to handle that.
As far as public participation, that public participation would be for speaking in person. I mean, if you want to speak, have a comment read, you can still submit it in advance. I think we should still have that option. But if you want to verbally speak at the meetings, need to come to the ASC. All right, Andrea, you have something?
Can I please bring up one other quick topic? The board at the meeting took action to require in-person, 100% in-person working as of July 6th. And because it was board action, I don't have flexibility to work outside of that. And I'm just asking for a little bit of flexibility to, on a one-to-one basis, work with staff who are struggling with that 100% return to work as of July 6th. Certainly, as we're getting closer to the school year, we will, we'll continue to review that. But I just was hoping for a little bit more flexibility that we could work with our staff on.
What kind of a deadline do you need, Andrea? What would you propose moving the date back to 100% participation? August 15 or what?
August 1st would be totally fine, but I still think, the default is still 100% as of July 6th, because a lot of our staff need to be physically present to do a lot of their work. But just having some flexibility within that first month transition back, that if someone comes forward with a compelling reason why they need to work from home, at least on a percentage basis for the month of July, I frankly would rather have them do the work that we know that they can do at home for some positions than have them use FFCRA leave. And then we don't have the work getting done.
So Andrea, would you not typically have the flexibility to make, in my mind, that would just be a COVID or not, that there would be flexibility to enable people to work from home if that's what was needed. Is that not how it works?
We typically, as a school district, have never allowed for working from home. This is the one time that we have. And then when the board took action was it last month, to say 100% as of July 6th. I just didn't want to have it be a perception that we were doing something inconsistent with that board directive, if you're comfortable with having some flexibility.
Rob?
So Andrew, to your point, we agreed that, you know, coming up here shortly, that we'd have 100% participation. You're now asking for August 1st, which I'm fine with, you know, whatever's best for the team. But in lieu of pushing it to August 1st and then having a conversation in August or late July about moving it to September, would it just make more sense, given the COVID environment that we're in, to just temporarily postpone that requirement? Or are you looking for a hard deadline?
I don't think in this realm right now that hard deadlines are super great, honestly. Like, I think that flexibility to adapt to this constantly changing environment is what's best, and what I'm seeing most employers utilize. So that they're, I think August, certainly mid-August, just changes the game so significantly because of bringing all the staff back, right? Like, I think that necessitates an on-site presence. I certainly don't want to be going down the road of saying certified classroom teachers can work from home, because I don't think that's consistent with essential functions of their job. It's to, you know, work with our children individually. So I'm just trying to tread carefully, but be respectful of some staff members who are struggling a lot with the daycare issue, not being able to find care, or some personal health situations where if they can have a little bit more of a balanced approach to returning to work, it might let us keep the work moving forward. But yeah, I think flexibility instead of hard deadlines, but having a default of returning to work would be the most advantageous route.
So Andrea, if you could, I mean, you mentioned August 1st and then you said mid-August, which is fine. Again, from a team standpoint, please make a recommendation on what you think. I think to Jamie's point, what it is you're looking for, and, you know, then we can talk about it.
I think, Rob, what she's asking for is just if we just add a friendly amendment to our previous directive, and that is that this just be enforced at the discretion of the administration. That's all we have to do. Then we don't have to change dates or anything. I think that's kind of Rob's point anyways. We don't want to be changing multiple dates. Would that do it, Andrea, if we just added that language?
Just let us have some discretion to make the determination if it works. It's mutually beneficial to come up with compromise.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
All right, second by Sue. Any comments on this?
Just please be it noted that that is the first friendly amendment for the evening.
Yeah, right. Well, and it goes back three board meetings, so I don't know if that's actually technically a friendly amendment if it's not happening in the same meeting, but I'm not going to pull out my Roberts rules at this point. I just think that we got to be careful in the future when we make those motions that we just always add that, you know, to be administered by administration, you know, at the discretion of the administration. If we just do that, then we don't get ourselves in these mandates. So, Carrie, did you have anything?
Yeah. I guess I wouldn't be entirely comfortable with that it's mutually beneficial to the district and to the employee. If the employee is in a hardship situation and can get the work done from home.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess that's just kind of off-putting, that phrase.
And I totally
obviously can't be to the
understand that.
detriment to the district, but yeah.
And I was more thinking, like, you know, if like once August starts hitting and we have, we're already seeing a significant uptick in traffic into the district office, like that presence is really helpful for the district. And so that's kind of what I was thinking, but I get what you're saying for sure. And that's not, I mean, we've had really great conversations with our staff about these issues up to this point. So I would expect to continue to, you know, work together positively.
Okay, thank you.
All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Do you have any more COVID update stuff?
No, that's it.
Good. Only 1 hour and 7 minutes into the meeting for a 30-minute discussion. All right. We're set a great pace tonight. We'll see you all at 2 a.m. All right. So next up on the agenda is the equity discussion.
Absolutely. And so, you know, as you saw, we did put out a letter from the district condemning what happened to Mr. Floyd, and hoping that those involved are held accountable. But it really causes us to have an even deeper discussion as a district, because it's one thing to kind of provide lip service to some of these causes. It's another thing to actually do actionable things. And so one of the things that we want to do tonight is, Aaron's going to talk a little bit about what are some of the things that we are currently doing as it relates to equity across our district for all of our kids, in the different groups. And then, Dave's going to touch a little bit on what, curricularly, some of the things we've done equity wise, and then Andrea, just from kind of a staff perspective. And then, want to basically have it be a dialogue with the board as to where would you like to see us go from here, and where is your direction? And we can definitely move with it, but we want to get some direction, some feedback from you guys. So I guess to kind of start off, just to give a little background for everybody, I'll start with Erin if she wants to kind of give a little bit of background of activities that we're going to lead the kids.
Sure. We've talked a lot about increasing our inclusive practices within the district, and this, does focus on special education, but really looking at all kids. So the partnership with teaching and learning with our rigor, teamwork, inclusion, really looking at analyzing our data, looking at where our gaps are. We've really looked at everything from achievement, behavior, participation in activities. That sense of belonging piece on the YRBS has been impactful in terms of our work. This is certainly an area that we need to continue to focus on, and I think this summer just kind of reaffirmed a lot of the work that we're doing, and motivates us to do more. This school year, we did engage in building culturally responsive systems training. So that was in partnership with the RTI Center and the Disproportionality Technical Assistance Network through DPI. So that was a series of 3 trainings. Unfortunately, we only were able to get in one before school closed. But we did have a meeting with them last week, and so that will continue in the fall as well. So we had quite a big group participate in that training this year. It included district leadership, counselors, and teacher leaders, as well as building principals. So something that will continue. Really proud of the work that our school counselors did in response to the situation in Minneapolis. We had quite a few K-12 counseling team meetings, and they were pushing out resources to families about how to talk to your kids about race. They are organizing some book studies for staff for over the summer and the fall, which is great. Yeah. Lots of work to be done, but proud of the work that we're doing. So.
And Nick, you want me to jump in there then on the curricular side? All right, so from a curricular perspective, the equity conversation is obviously a very important one. I think that we've done a lot of really good things, but we've done them informally. It's now incumbent upon us to formalize them to guarantee that they're in place all the time. An example of that is when we look at multicultural initiatives. So we've been exploring multicultural education for years, but until recently, we haven't really formalized that in our curriculum improvement process. We've done that now. So as we go through the process, as we move forward, when we get to the point of designing learning experiences and selecting resources, we're going to consider the multicultural perspective, which helps with our equity concerns and goals. It's really important that all our students see themselves reflected in the learning experiences, in the curriculum, in the books, in the resources. That's critical. In a community like ours, we have something we often refer to, a phenomenon of masking inequities. We have inequities, we have marginalized students, we have kids that need more support to be heard and to have their voices recognized and validated. And sometimes that gets lost in the overall general success. You know, we can talk about a high percentage of students that are either finding success in a certain path academically, socially, whatever it might be, but there's always other students who aren't, and it's important that we remove barriers. A really good example of positive movement in this direction is the adoption of our Fontes Pinnell classroom elementary literacy curriculum. That was piloted very successfully at Willow River last year. It will be implemented system-wide throughout the entire district K-5 next year, and we're really looking forward to it. It's a super solid curricular resource, and we've got a lot of training and support in place. The feedback, though, that came even beyond the fact that it's really good instructionally, the teachers were thrilled with the diversity in the resource selection. So the books represented many different cultures, many different races. There was a gender balance that was ensured, and the teachers noticed it. It jumped out at them. It wasn't even something, I wish we could take credit for leading this process of exploring it that way, but it happened more organically. The teachers came to us and said, thank you, this is what we're looking for. We want to make sure that is reflected in all that we do. So that's sort of our work on the curricular side of things. There's a lot of equity work that relates to things like assessment practices. We need to make sure that there's not bias in our assessment practices, and just a variety of different things, but we do need to look at it holistically. We talked many times about our rigor, teamwork, inclusion team, which is without a doubt my favorite aspect of what we do as a district. That's something that Student Services and Teaching and Learning have been partnering with for a number of years. And that team is primed and ready to really help us with our equity goals. They've got the right mindset for it, and we've laid the groundwork with them so they can take us to the next level.
Sorry, Sue, do you have a question?
Willow River has done a lot of kind of innovative things. But what is that thing that they do in the spring where the kids learn about a historical figure, living or dead, that I think it's well-known Black Americans, and then they kind of dress up like the person, and then, you know, they're kind of
The Wax Museum?
Yeah, the Wax Museum.
Is that it? And then when you talk to the child, you can, you know, ask them about themselves, but they speak in the voice of you know, the individual. So I don't know if that's like during Black History Month or what, but those are very positive. I think those are very positive learning experiences.
Yeah, they definitely are, and that brings up an important point, because that's definitely tied to social studies. And social studies is really, that's an area where we can directly get toward some of our equity goals and address some of the issues we want to address. Social studies will be coming up for review shortly. I'm really looking forward to digging into that. There's a lot we can do there. We need to get beyond studying African American history only during African American History Month or Martin Luther King Day. We need to have a more defined scope and sequence. And I think there's a lot of great stuff that's happening, but we need to be more deliberate in our rollout.
Heather?
Thanks. So I'm curious. I know, like all of you probably have been trying to read and learn a lot over the past month. And one of the things that I feel like I'm seeing in general, and also when it relates to schools, is that even a very well-intentioned, well-read group of white people can't and shouldn't be the ones figuring out how to best address these issues. I know we have limited diversity on our staff. So do we currently have a way that, like, does the RTI, does that engage students and families of color? Or do we have ways that we are directly bringing the voice of these students and their family members into these conversations as we are, you know, reviewing curriculum and looking at other practices kind of within and outside the walls of our schools?
Sure, and I'll just start on from the curricular perspective. The answer, sadly, is no. We haven't done that, and that gets to that idea of being more deliberate. That's something we need to do a better job of. As you said, we all have our own perspectives. We all have our own backgrounds and our own viewpoints. But I mean, one of the primary functions of education is to broaden perspectives. So we can't come in just with our own perspectives and assume that that's going to translate to a well-rounded education. So we do need to do a better job. And I think that's, to a large degree, that's the purpose of the conversation tonight, to get some guidance and understand, you know, how you'd like us to approach some of these issues and sort of a big picture view of goals and outcomes.
Go ahead, Rob.
And so certainly, I think to build upon Heather's point, you know, we have, I think, if I remember correctly, roughly 12% diversity in our school district. And so certainly families of color are important. LGBTQ plus, you know, families are important. We do a ton of surveying and engagement. You know, what can we do or what's being planned to further engage those folks, survey those folks, make sure their voices are heard and participate in the overall planning of everything we have going on.
Well, you know, and I think that's the big piece. I mean, we're going to have to be more intentional about it. And you know, we've kicked around several ideas in the cabinet meeting, from potentially looking at, you know, an equity audit. You know, having somebody come in and look at our district for areas that we're finding our blind spots, to, you know, looking at coordinator positions, you know, potentially to kind of dig into, also maybe even reaching out to, because our community is not as diverse as maybe other communities, it may be that we may have to go across the river and seek out some folks, whether it be, you know, African American Chamber of Commerce, you know, different groups of folks that can help guide us through some of this discussion. Because I think, as you said, you know, having people that are helping, you know, have the conversations that are actually having to go through some of the challenges and things like that becomes more valuable than just, you know, a group of 20 or 30 people that is pretty homogeneous in nature and trying to say, well, this is what we could do. I mean, and so it's even things like Andrew and I have talked about, you know, as we're looking at candidate, you know, trying to recruit more candidates, persons of color and things along those lines. How do we do that? I mean, how are we more intentional? Not just, hey, we're posting on the traditional job boards and things like that, but are we trying to make, you know, are we trying to make inroads with HBCs and other groups to try to attract candidates and things like that to our district? And so, yeah, I mean, I can tell you that we have not done a good enough job to address this and to have enough people looking at it from that standpoint. And it's something we want to improve on. So Bruce, you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was just going to make a comment, you know, a couple of things around the lines, especially in the staffing side. You know, the tracking of the data itself, I think, would be helpful. We actually, in our organization, launched a program where, for, I think it's director or VP and above, has to include at least one individual of a different race, or, you know, diversity component. So I look at that, and I think just managing to understand and say, you know, we have to do this or we can't move forward with the hiring process. Now, difficult, I recognize, because some positions are even hard to find one or two candidates. So you probably can't do it for everyone, but to, you know, make sure that you're tracking the data, that helps on the intentionality piece. Mm-hmm. You know, I think some other things that we maybe lose sight of, but sometimes get lost when we're trying to plan our calendar and make sure that we're, you know, getting everything in a time frame and still getting out early, and you know, is just missing recognition. Maybe days that, you know, are out there that should be called out, you know, Juneteenth, for instance, being one of those. How do you maybe recognize the day, even though you're not necessarily maybe taking that off, just like you wouldn't take Good Friday off, or we haven't been. How do you still, make an effort to appropriately communicate, educate? And those are just examples. There are a number of opportunities that we could use there in terms of education. So I think trying to look for, those best practices out there, see what others are doing, what others are implementing. And I can assure you that many companies are putting new policies in place in their organizations, be it a school, public organization, or a private organization, because it's time to take the action that we need to in order to put some serious effort towards this. So I'll share the newsletter with you, Nick, and just at least you can see some of the different things that we're doing in our organization, which I was pleased to see.
And to go along with that.
Go ahead, Andrea.
No, I was just going to cover the staffing part. So, but sorry, I'll go ahead. Okay. So just to share quickly, I mean, we have, historically posted on all the, the Minnesota websites, the Wisconsin websites, Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin school leadership sites. We have gone to Indeed.com, CareerBuilder.com. So we try to have a broad reach, and then we recruit regionally as well at UW River Falls, La Crosse, Stout, Eau Claire. But I think it's that intentionality piece that I think we have to change our lens. Like, I think the focus has been having it's controversial word right now, but the colorblind approach, right? Like, you receive the applications and you don't consider race, color, LGBTQ status, anything like that. You just process applications. But how do we make a more intentional effort to encourage people to apply? How do we seek them out to have more diversity and have our staff, whether it's certified or support staff, be more representative of our student population? That's something Nick and I have talked about, where I think that there's things that we can explore and would be super exciting to explore, because it's something that is challenging in our community. I mean, few situations where we've had some interested candidates, a big problem we have is housing in our community. I mean, affordable housing. Most people want to, if they're going to be moving to an area, they want to live in the area that they work, which is reasonable. But in Hudson, that can be, in St. Croix County, that can be a barrier. And so we're not necessarily that attractive when it comes to some candidates, when they can look across the river and find more affordable housing. It is a hurdle, but what can we do deliberately, intentionally to improve upon our practices? I think we're all in trying to figure that out.
Sue?
Oh, Andrea, what kinds of things are happening in HR now to solve that problem? Like in the application form, is it just pretty straightforward, or is there any place where people can have an opportunity to write any kind of narrative, let's say, about their life, so that it might give you a glimpse into perspective that their life, maybe they're people of color, or they're a biracial family or something like that?
And there are opportunities for narrative. There's a series of questions that they answer. There's also a cover letter that they submit. But I do think, just putting my attorney hat back on too, historically, it's always been to minimize any receipt of that type of information, so it doesn't look as if you're screening on that basis. Like, I remember a presentation I used to give with Steve Weld was, you can't ask these questions on a application, because then you're inadvertently getting information potentially about their religious background, potentially about their ethnicity, where you don't necessarily want that, because it could be perceived as a screening tool, which we wouldn't do, but it was always a cautionary note. But so how do we change that lens, right? Like, how do we switch that to make it a positive without introducing the biases? I don't know. And I think we can certainly work with Shayna on that balance between the two, because certainly there's the opportunity for narrative. There's series of 10 questions for every position. And then there's also that cover letter where they can tell us some basic information about themselves. But yeah.
Just a quick follow-up. So let's say you get down to the 6 candidates. Is there some situational thing that they can do in the interview that might also broaden the scope of what that person is all about? Like, I remember when we hired teachers, that was the easy thing to do because we would give them a kind of a quick lesson that they had to do with us or something.
And we do some of that.
Situational thing. And you know, that kind of gave you an idea about them. But yeah, so I don't know anything about HR, so that's why I'm asking.
But no, definitely. I mean, we do some tests, we do some, for support staff, it's test-based type of items, but then for certified staff, occasionally we have the teachers teach a lesson. Sometimes we ask for a sample lesson. I mean, there's different things that we've done there, certainly.
Andrea?
Heather, did you have a question? Or Carrie?
It wasn't HR related, so let's finish up the HR conversation first. That's fine.
Have the postings that have gone out changed in any way to indicate that we are looking for a more culturally diverse, not candidate pool, but culturally diverse employees, so that would maybe welcome those comments from any applicants?
We haven't changed yet. We haven't really, we won't have a next rush of posts until mid-July. Don't really, there's only, I think, one right now that that we're recruiting for at the high school, but I think we can definitely do that. Like, and that's where I'll just want to rely upon Shana and like, what kind of language does she recommend so that we're consistent with the law, but certainly encouraging of
diverse backgrounds.
Yes.
Andrea, do most of our student teachers come from UWRF?
UWRF, Eau Claire is gaining popularity, but I would say certainly the most consistent numbers come from UWRF.
I mean, because that could be another strategy I would think would be what schools do we partner with? Because that exposes those teacher candidates to our district.
And the problem with that, though, is that also UWRF, UW Eau Claire, La Crosse, their diversity in the education area isn't as great either. I mean, we don't have much of an ability to go to Minneapolis schools because there's just not that level of partnership across the borders. But it'd be great if we had more of a diverse pool to begin with to grab from those student teachers, because we do a lot of hiring from our student teachers.
So how do we increase that partnership with Minnesota schools, colleges?
I'll have to talk to them. I don't know if there's that willingness because of the licensing variances between Minnesota and Wisconsin. The DPI, you know, for Wisconsin leads the charge there. And then with Minnesota, it's a different set of criteria. So I can talk to Sandy and Dave too and find out more. I don't know that much about Minnesota because they just haven't been seeking us out at all. And River Falls has such a constant flow. But again, that's where we can make that extra effort now and try to make, you know, deliberate, intentional changes there.
Okay.
Rob, do you have your hand up?
Thank you. So certainly hiring is important, making sure that people of color, the LGBTQ community locally sees, you know, staff who are being hired and are part of their community. That said, you know, we have an existing, you know, student population. We have an existing teacher staff population, especially in the LGBTQ area, and students of color who don't feel well connected. And so I know that we have, you know, staff who are trying to engage, but what are we doing from an administrative standpoint to help those staff members, those other teachers, engage their community, if you will, to feel comfortable in their skin and feel comfortable in their culture?
We certainly have GSA groups, and Aaron can speak to some of that, where it's more that student staff relationship that we've been encouraging of.
I think, you know, some of it too is professional development for staff on even recognizing that this bias exists. I mean, we have staff on a lot of varying levels of understanding. And so to create that kind of sense of urgency for staff, you know, we have some work to do in professional development, and just the understanding that this is kind of a societal and systems issue. And it doesn't always mean we treat every kid the same. And I think that sometimes is hard to tease out, but definitely conversations that we're willing to lean into.
Potential vehicle for getting after that a bit is the advisory. And we've been talking that the advisory curriculum will need a bit of a revamping and some energizing. And that would be both at the middle school and high school level. Particularly at the high school level, we need to do some work there to build up the advisory program back to what it was intended to be. And that serves as a really nice opportunity to address some of these issues and to do it in a way where it builds community. It's not just educational, it's also like a classroom community building experience. And that starts at the elementary level. It's not just a secondary issue. It needs to start at the elementary level through morning meetings and a couple other vehicles that we can leverage to improve things.
Other comments? I guess I wanted to piggyback on the last one, and that is about recognizing bias and so forth. And I had passed on to the board members, but I don't know if I copied you, Nick, and maybe you could share with your team that the YMCA is offering education opportunity. They're both on, there's three of them, well, 3 different subjects, 4 total time frames, and the next 2 are on days that we have board meetings. So July 13th at 3 o'clock, there's one about transforming workplace culture. And on July 20th at 3 o'clock, there's one about implicit bias. I know I can attend those 2. The third is on August 3rd. That's authentic community engagement, but I've got a conflict that day. So, I mean, I think authentic community engagement, recognizing implicit bias, and transforming workplace culture, 3 pretty viable topics that would help us in understanding how we get our arms around this subject and attack it. But I saw somebody, Heather, was that you, or you had your hand up again? And you're frozen now, Heather. All right, there you go.
Okay, so Aaron, I would like to go back, because we touched and then wandered coming into this conversation, so that this discussion about what exists is helpful, because I think coming into this conversation, in my mind, there were really 3 things I was hoping we would touch on. One was this, what are we doing? Because I feel like, if someone from the community were to ask me, I know we're doing stuff, I just wouldn't be able to rattle it off. So I would love for you to talk a little bit more about is school-based clubs for middle and high school kids that exist that really are trying to help build community and connect kids maybe with adults. The second piece, and Jamie just touched on it, was kind of what we as a board might want to commit to when it comes to board development around some of these issues. Those webinars, Jamie, look great. In fact, my whole work team is signed up for them. And I think there's some value in doing something together as a group. I think going through some of that process together is helpful. So the second thing really was that kind of the board development piece. And then the third piece I'm wondering about, and I asked about it earlier, is I wonder if we shouldn't be considering some sort of an advisory committee to the board that would really help at this critical time bring voice of students and families, kind of the students of color, the LGBTQ community, maybe the disabled community. I mean, some of these groups that we know are there in numbers, but they're small. And I think we often don't feel like we hear from them. If there's a formal way that we might help bring that voice to us, because I know, when I saw in the news the letter that was written by the Stillwater students, the Black Student Alliance in Stillwater, where they were both praising the district's work and yet really saying, wow, do we have a lot of work to do, and calling out how differently and poorly they are treated at that district. I mean, my thought was, I have no idea what Black students in Hudson would say about their experience.
Yeah.
I'm not friends with any of them. I don't know any of their parents. And so, I mean, feeling like I would like there to be a more formal way for us to be hearing directly from some of these students and their families about their experience in our district. So, but to go back, Erin, if you could just talk a little bit
So
about clubs.
both the middle school and the high school have a diversity club, mainly focused on the students of color. And I think that's another opportunity for us to lean into this year and really kind of empowering that group and giving them a bit of a voice, a more formal voice, if that makes sense. Like, we really are kind of asking for their input. I think that's something that we can certainly look into this year. You know, I think from a board perspective, and this is just me speaking, I guess, I think we've started to tease through the data regarding what we're seeing by race, right? And different disaggregated groups. And maybe that's something that, you know, as we prepare reports throughout the year, that maybe that's something that I certainly can focus on more of that in my reports and providing you that information so you have that perspective. You know, one of the things that we're working on with special education specifically is looking at our Hispanic students who are over-identified in special education. And so really digging into the why is that happening. So definitely more conversations to have in terms of the data.
And
Did I
Nick,
answer your
have we
question?
have we gotten through most of the list? I mean, I see Sue has her hand up, so Sue, go ahead.
Make this a coda. You know, I hear your idea, Heather, about them coming to us, but there might be opportunities on campus where we would go to them. For example, darn it all, I keep forgetting that Diversity puts on a program. Diversity Club puts on a program, I think, you know, sort of a variety kind of performance thingy. And I always wish I could go to that, and then it happens, and then I read about it. But maybe if it's appropriate, when some of the clubs and organizations of our kids that fit more into the color, etc., maybe there'd be an opportunity for us board members to be able to attend some function that they're doing, so that we go to them, you know. I'm thinking, and I should interject that this last Sunday would have been Pride March in Minneapolis, but with COVID that got lost, of course, but everyone kind of knows it's a big weekend, so.
All right. So there was a Black Lives Matter march, or a march in Hudson a few Saturdays ago. I went. I know Bob, I think you were there. I know Rob was there, and it was you know, pretty well attended. I was very impressed with the turnout. There were some good speakers, and there was some speakers also that had some anecdotes that, you know, didn't reflect well on our district. And I want to just know, like, maybe in the future, what would be opportunities for, if students perceive an issue, do we have avenues where that kind of thing could be reported and investigated promptly?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly have avenues for that. And I think that's something that we need to clarify, you know, with our students as we review the handbooks. I think that's something that we, at the high school and middle school, they review those in advisory. And so I think if we can, you know, do some PD for teachers on what specifically should you highlight here and spend a bit more time talking about, and who are those point people to go to. you know, I think that just pairs very well with the work that we're going to do in building stronger student-teacher connections.
And I think the policies that you guys just did the second reading of, by reworking the bullying, harassment, discrimination policies, making, in my opinion, much more accessible, much more easily defined of where you go if there's an issue. I think we highlight that. It's a perfect opportunity to really emphasize that to the staff. And I think we positioned ourselves well to have that conversation going into the fall.
Okay. Well, I don't want to be premature in having, you know, some type of action plan, but I want to make sure that this is regularly on our, for sure, working agenda, and hopefully on our action agenda, we're actually doing action items to make it a more, you know, equitable place where people don't feel discriminated and so forth. And so what would be a time frame? Like, we've been given some ideas from, for instance, Dave talked about curriculum. What would be a time frame? Is it 90 days, 120 days, when we might be able to find here, okay, this is what we've done in this area to beef up our equity? Can we have some type of time frame on that? Because I mean, I know it's a balancing act, because we're talking about putting more on everyone's plate. And so far, I haven't heard a recommendation for creating the number of plates, so to speak, in the cabinet by having an assistant director of equity or anything. But if the directors are confident that this can be given the attention that it needs with all the other stuff without an assistant director of equity, I guess I'm fine with that. But I just want to be able to show our community this is what we're doing, and we're regularly talking about it, not just saying words, but actually taking action items. So Heather, did you have a question?
Well, yeah, I just, I wonder if that's not premature. You know, I mean, I think I go back to the whole, how are we engaging students of color and their families to find out what do they think we should be working on? Because they might say curriculum schmiculum, here's a bigger problem that you need to be addressing, you know? And so I lean toward thinking, and whether it's an administrative type, you know, forum commit, I don't know what it is, or if it's a board commit, well, I don't know what structure exactly, but I mean, I really feel like what we're hearing is you need to start listening and provide better opportunities for people to tell you what their experience is like and how you can make it different for them. And so I would really like to see us start before we say 90 days or 120 days for curriculum reform. I would like to have some feedback from those folks whom we think are most impacted by this curriculum about is that it, and what other what are we maybe not even thinking about that they would say this is where you should start. So
Tracy had a really,
that's great point, Heather. Go ahead, Andrea.
Tracy had a really, we were talking about in cabinet a couple weeks ago, and like the idea of having an engagement opportunity, you know, where we find out, we do that work before we get to plans. We find out, okay, what problem are we trying to fix exactly, and how do we most effectively tackle it? By hearing from the community at different sources of the community. I think, I don't know, that resonated with me when I was hearing her talk about it, that might be a good option.
Well, and one of you alluded, I think, Dave, it was you, I'm not sure, to this idea of an equity audit. I mean, that might be something to think about too. I mean, because, you know, when we were talking about the, you know, do students know where to go with their complaints? I think, you know, some of them are the most obvious egregious things that happen. But then there are the subtle things that happen that we might not even notice. So I think that idea of I don't know if those go hand in hand or, but I would like to see both. I mean, to get that qualitative feedback from students and family members, but also to have someone who really knows what they're looking for, to be able to come into our district and help us see what we might not see on our own. I think that's important.
Can we do those at the same time? An equity audit, and then also do some form of survey / engagement / input, and put a time frame on it? That's all I want to do. Is I want to show that we are not just talking about doing it someday, so that in 2021 we get a report back. I want to set some deadlines for getting this stuff done. So
Would it make sense to seek outside counsel for that guidance and facilitate the feedback session in a socially distanced situation? Maybe yet even the summer or early fall?
I think that's a great idea, Carrie. I think, for us, it's going to be consulting with people beyond us, saying, okay, if we really want to understand where our blind spots are in the district, how do we do that? And, some people might say, we might be thinking, oh, let's have this community event feedback thing. And somebody might say, nobody's going to come to that. You're not going to get what you want out of that. Let me explain to you how, if you really want to get this feedback, what's the best way to get through it. And I think that's going to, what we could promise is by the time school starts in the next 2 months, is that we will have a plan in place of how we are going to get that feedback. We're going to reach out to different folks to try to determine what's the best way to get feedback from our kids, from our community, and to understand what are the priorities and then what should be our direction. I mean, that's a promise we can make by September 1st. We will have that plan in place and what that looks like, and potentially facilitated by a third party. Go ahead, Bob.
I was just going to say that I agree with Jamie that the urgency is to act on this. I did speak with Senator Shackner at the march, and she said a lot of communities, she obviously goes to a lot of these types of gatherings, and she's like, she spoke, she said you have to listen and learn before you act. But I agree with Jamie that it needs to happen now, quickly, but with the help of with outside, because we're not going to do it ourselves. Not going to be able to do it ourselves with an intelligent lens on what's needed.
All right, Rob, you have your hands up, and Sue next.
So one question, and I guess a comment, but question first: who on the cabinet, or I guess throughout the district, who ultimately is the leader of this? I mean, certainly Nick, you're the leader overall, but of your cabinet, who's responsible for the diversity and equity discussion?
Yeah, I mean, that's where there is a shortcoming, and we don't have necessarily a person that is coordinating all of these different things. When we talked as a group, my concern is just saying, well, we're just going to now name Andrea our diversity coordinator. We're just going to name, Aaron our diversity coordinator. Are we giving lip service to something just to say that we have it? And I think, I believe there will come a point where I think we are going to have to potentially, once we know what it is that we need to be doing, we're going to need to probably look at personnel related to really putting action to these things, because everybody's plates are very full, and I don't want these things on the back burner. And I'll be quite honest with you. What I've kind of witnessed over the last several weeks in response to what happened in Minneapolis, it is extremely troubling to me. And it has been really a soul-searching thing for me to understand, as the leader of this district, is there more that I can be doing to making sure that all of our kids have an equitable experience regardless. And so, when I think Heather brought up an equity coordinator, potentially, I think it was last fall, I had some level of opposition to it. I didn't really truly understand what the need would be for what we would do. And I would say that I have changed perspective on that. I think that there will become a need, but as Tracy talked about, as Andrews talked about, Dave, we need to understand what exactly we're going to be asking that person to do before we hire that person, if we go down that route. And because it is not just talking about persons of color, it is talking about people in our LGBTQ plus community. It is talking about kids in our special ed community. It is, with special needs, it is talking about and making sure that we do have equity for all kids, and that all truly means all. And so I guess what I would promise to all of you is I will spearhead the approach to getting the information of what it looks like to get this forum set up or feedback set up, or what that looks like, as Carrie talked about, and really be the lead person to report back to you guys and saying, you know, by September 1st or the meeting there around, we'll be able to say, these are the things that we're doing. And I will definitely spearhead that and reach out to different folks and what that looks like.
So just for, I guess, everybody's edification, Monona Grove, just another school district near Madison, I think 2 years ago, they had a similar situation. They started a committee that ultimately, if I remember correctly, reported to the board. The superintendent there, his name is Dan. I can't remember his last name, but they have just a wonderful equity subcommittee that's made up of community members. I think there's one board member. The superintendent's highly engaged. So Nick, as you're taking notes, if for whatever it's worth, if you wanted to reach out to the superintendent there, his name's Dan. There may be maybe a couple carrots there for us.
All right, Dave, did you have a question too?
Yeah, just a comment. I want to make sure it's clear that there is some allusion to cabinet members being hesitant about the idea of an equity coordinator, and that's definitely not the case. I think the direction that you're heading is exactly what we were hoping for, that there's some direction first. So whether that be through an audit or something. So if we bring that position on, we've spent some time framing what our goals would be, and what some direction would be for that individual, so they would be set up for success if that's the direction we ultimately go.
All right, and
Mr.
Sue, you
President.
had a question. Comment. Sue and then Carrie. Yep, Sue.
I'll yield to Carrie and then come back.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was going to yield to Dave, but now I'm trying to yield to somebody. But, anyway, I think one of the very important things you said, Jamie, several minutes back, in commenting about us having this discussion on diversity, and I think we're still fact gathering here and conversation gathering and listening to one another too. So what would happen if on our agenda we set up, I don't know, 20 minutes, and we just put in there diversity or equity discussion and see, you know, what we're bringing to the table. And that would be a suggestion. And then the other question I have is now the two people that have to replace Sandy, are either of them coming with any qualifications that are kind of perhaps lending themselves to helping us out in this area of leadership in the area of equity? I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Quite a bit, actually. Ivy Wheeler, who will be the director of secondary teaching and learning, has done a lot of extensive equity work in the Cleveland public school system, where we're recruiting her from. She has a lot of very direct skills in working. She was an equity coordinator as a sub. I don't want to misspeak. I'd have to look back at the notes, but a formalized role in leading equity charge in Cleveland. That was something that appealed to us greatly. And besides that, she's wonderful. So really looking forward to getting her on board.
Okay, Carrie, did you have something?
Well, I guess specifically to Sue's point, I would just make the point that noting a time on an agenda is completely irrelevant to how long we'd spent on it. But maybe rather than a September 1st deadline for this scenario, this September 14th might make sense because it is our annual meeting, but I mean, whatever the date is, so be it. And just in regards to the equity piece, I mean, yes, we're talking maybe about 12% of our population or student population, but it's looking at making 90% of our population more compassionate. So it will benefit all of us and certainly all of our students.
Well, I think to follow up on Carrie's suggestion, I think a great idea. Let's call it. I mean, does anybody have any problem with making it the September 14th meeting, because it may be a more watched meeting. It's a shorter meeting because we have an annual meeting that follows, but still, I think it's a great goal to get a report and for a plan. And then that plan moving forward would be, you know, what a survey engagement would look like and a path for some of these other items. I think that that's great. And then maybe once that's kicked off, maybe we do put it on our work session agenda, just like we did with this COVID. We put it on the agenda for every meeting, just like we did with construction. We put it on, we got an update, whether it was a work session or an action meeting, but if we put it on for the work session, so that there's a discussion about, okay, how are we doing on this? And it's kind of a check-in. I'd be all for that, starting putting it on our work session agendas, following that plan, once we get that plan in place on September 14th. Hopefully we're taking action too, but at least we're having an opportunity and a venue for discussing it and keeping the train moving on the tracks. Carrie?
No, I just was giving you a thumbs up.
Okay, great. Okay.
I mean, I guess I would just, I mean, and if it can happen, I mean, because it's really a plan to plan, right? So on one, there's this kind of urgency and this like seizing the moment opportunity, I feel like. And so, you know, if we're saying 2.5 months from now, we're going to have a report on how we're going to start this process. And then, you know, if it does involve bringing someone in, that it's going to probably be another month or so before we were actually talking to people. It feels like it's a really long time between now and when we're actually engaging people in conversation. So I think the more that we can expedite that, the better. If I understood correctly, that the thing that's going to be presented is here's how we're going to move ahead with this idea of engaging people. I mean, so that feels really, really far out.
Well, and part of that would be, because my hopes would be over the next 2 months would be to be interacting with leaders from all these different communities and subgroups, and trying to understand who should be at the table and what does that look like. So it's not just, hey, here's the plan of how we're going to get to those people. It's that conversation already happened based on those conversations that we've already had with those people. This is the direction we think we should take.
So I misunderstood. I thought like if we would bring in someone to help us facilitate an equity audit and focus groups, they would be helping with that work. So, okay. You're saying we'll do that work beforehand.
Well, I mean, equity audit, when I've seen equity audits done, because we used to have them done every 5 years in Iowa, I mean, they're very extensive. They take a long time. They're not just call people up and they turn it around in a week. It's a long time, but I guess what I was hoping to do is to reach out, like I said, leaders in the different communities and different groups of people to really understand, to get to how do you think the best way for us to approach this is, how do we get feedback from people, and who should we enlist as far as doing that to help do that, so that when September 14th rolls around, we're saying, okay, we've already talked to members of the African American community or Hispanic community or the LGBTQ community, and based on the conversations we've had, this is where I think is the best route for us to go. I mean, the thing that I think people have to understand, yes, there's a sense of urgency, but we also, the next 2 months are going to be pretty full of stuff for folks. Not that this wouldn't be as important, it definitely is, but I'm just, we may not be able to run the type of focus groups we'd like to run or community conversations we'd like to run in the next 2 months. We may have to wait, 3 months or something, but I just, I can give you kind of an update in August and let you know where I'm at with it and the direction we're heading, so that we don't lose momentum on it.
Mr. President?
Yes, Carrie, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I would appreciate that planful approach as you meet with several groups, and also recognizing that you also have to come up with a back to school plan given the COVID situation. So not to lessen the importance of either one, but I would prefer that you be planful rather than act hastily. Not to suggest, Heather, that that's at all what you meant, but I don't think 10 weeks or whatever it is, given both of these scenarios, is I think to act more quickly would be irresponsible for us.
And I know that I'm one of the senior members of the board, and 10 weeks is not that long of a time. So in the scheme of things. I think we want to, like Carrie said, be deliberate. I'm hopeful that at that meeting, because it is an action meeting, that there's going to be specific action items that we may be able to take at that time, and maybe we'll have this auditor, ready to go. Maybe we'll have dates picked out for forums and a survey already drafted. So hopefully we'll have things ready to go. All right. Is there any further discussion on the equity piece? But I think some great ideas, great comments, and I see a lot of support on both the administration side and the board side.
Jamie, I would like us to look into some sort of formal board ed or board development on this subject. I know you shared the links for those YMCA, those 3 45-minute online sessions, but and maybe that's part of the plan that we look at rolling out start in September, but I don't want to forget that part, that I think we can do some work internally as a board.
Right, and I think it's been a couple years, but I think we're ready for another book study. And if anybody has suggestions that would be a good book for our school board, whether it's How to Be an Anti-Racist or whichever book out there might be a great book on this subject, I'm open for us to get 7 copies. And
what was the book study that Aaron suggested earlier, the guidance counselors are looking at?
Counselors are looking at, right now they're looking at doing white fragility as their book study.
Would that, do you think, be appropriate?
I think it would tie in nicely to what, school's doing, and just having that perspective as a board, but just one suggestion.
Okay.
All right. Well, whether you want to get print books or ebooks, maybe get your preference. Some of the board members maybe are into the Audible app, but however you want to get the book, I think we should maybe report in, and we'll get, I'll get the word back to Aaron who needs, what book in what form, and I'm open to that. All right. Anything more on that subject? Otherwise, good discussion. I'm open for a meeting break now, or do we want to get into the handbooks and then take a break?
Let's take a break now.
Yeah.
All right, we'll take a break to.
And some of the stuff's going to move a little bit quicker than some of these more heavy conversations that we've had. I mean, the handbook discussion we're not anticipating taking all that long unless people have things on it. And even the student policies a lot of those are, I don't want to say benign, they're just very regulatory, I guess, would be the best way to put it. Not necessarily subjective, but more objective as we work through it. So maybe if we want to try to knock out handbooks and student policies first, and then you guys could go to break and come back with the board self-assessment.
Let's knock out handbooks. I already sent all my commentary in, so.
Okay, well, let's see how long the handbooks take, and then maybe we'll jump on policy too. So we've got 4 different handbooks. And
so these are the different handbooks that we bring to you on an annual basis just for your review. This year, there aren't a ton of substantial changes. Although I'm going to go back to the high school admin team just in terms of one of our discussions tonight was making sure that kids know who that point person is and just have that discussion before it comes back to you at the next board meeting. Otherwise, the changes were really just updating the policies that we have updated in the last few months. So those are updated within the policies.
Okay.
And we've gotten feedback, like Sue, I think, has provided feedback. Carrie's provided some feedback. So otherwise, like I said, there's nothing really substantial changes. It's more updating. Aaron, is that a pretty fair assessment?
That's right. So it's just updating the policies and then our annual notifications within the handbooks.
I will say there was a great question Sue had brought up related to COVID type of information in the handbooks. And I think, as we kind of talked about as a cabinet team, we think that's probably because it's so fluid in nature and how we're going to respond to some of these things. That's probably going to be kind of a separate item outside of the handbook, that we'll constantly be sending out to staff and to parents and things like that, and then post it on, obviously, on the webpage and things like that. So as of right now, kind of the thought was we would hold off on COVID information from the handbooks just because it is ever changing.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
questions?
All right. No other questions about handbooks?
Okay.
All right. No, but I think it's real important to get those policy changes in there and bring that up to date. So, all right, next on to the policies. We'll skip over board assessment. We'll do that after we come back from break.
I can kick it off and then I'll send it to Aaron too. So this is our joint effort in working on student policies, and it's the next in a series. These, as Nick alluded to, are pretty benign policies. These are policies that haven't been updated since like 95, 97. So it's well past due. And then when it comes to the more substantive change, it's policy 423, which is the full-time public school open enrollment policy. We had sent this to our legal counsel, Shana Lewis, to review it. And so there are significant revisions to that. That one I think had been just updated in 2013.
Yep.
But then since then, there's just some modifications and some further definition of our practices. But I can have Aaron speak to anything significant with respect to these policy modifications.
Yeah.
Mostly we just took WASB as a sample unless we had a reason not to.
So we've been working to try to chunk the policies in groups that make sense. So these are really focused on admission and enrollment and pretty benign things like that. As Andrea said, a lot of these are well over 10 or 15 years old. So just really updating with current statutes and district practices. I think the policies that will come following this will lend itself to a lot more discussion. You know, and maybe in terms of being culturally sensitive, things that we can discuss when we get into things like attendance, truancy, and student behavior. But you know, these are fairly benign and statutory.
We can certainly walk you through them in more detail if you would love to. But because I know, Carrie, I know that, but because we're defaulting to WASB, unless we have a reason otherwise, I'm confident that it's in compliance, and I'm confident that Aaron's confident in that it's just a regurgitation of what our practices are in these areas. It's nothing earth shattering. 421.1 and 421.2, the only updates we made to those, and those are early admission to kindergarten and then admission to first grade, were like changing title of Aaron, because that's something that's Aaron's position, just because those policies are something that we use on such a regular basis and we feel confident in maintaining them. So nothing too crazy with these.
That was going to be my question, was of these 7 policies, is there 1 or 2 or 3 that are used most frequently?
Enrollment, certainly. I mean, I think we use that
sure.
every year, and then alternative open enrollment, we use that all the time whenever we get an application.
Yeah. Placement and credits from home-based programs we use, you know, on an annual basis for a handful of students for sure. Kids coming in who have been homeschooled and are now enrolling in middle school or high school. And then early entrance to kindergarten is something that we look at for a handful of requests every year.
But in none of these areas, there's not real big earth-shattering changes, like we're turning upside down the definition of full-time.
No, not at all, not at all. Nope. For the most part, they're adding more detail to the process, but it doesn't change what we currently do.
Heather,
What's that, Nick?
Heather had her hand up.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Heather. I didn't see that.
Nope, that's okay. So Andrea and Aaron, thank you for all the work on these. I would just encourage us to continue the work that we started with our last policy series and make a few tweaks for gender inclusive language.
Yes, thank you. Yep, we'll get that updated.
There was one of these policies too that was specifically, I took the language of our new 411 and put it specifically in here because WASB had a little bit different language. So I made sure that we integrated that language from 411 into this.
Great, thanks.
Okay, so we'll see that gender references changed before the first reading. All right, Rob. Are you?
Yeah,
Did you have your hand up, Rob?
I did. So
Okay.
423
Mhm.
4C talks about open enrollment and discipline. And it makes reference to any Wisconsin school in 2 years. So what about Minnesota? And so if they come from Minnesota or Iowa, should Wisconsin be there or should it just be, frankly, any school?
We would really have to look at that on an individual basis, I think, coming from another state. You know, we have had to review kind of those expulsion and disciplinary orders on an individual basis. So that's something I think we would work with Shayna on if we, well, hold on, this is open enrollment. You can't open enroll from another state. That's, sorry.
Yep, sorry, yep, I was gonna.
So that would be a moot point, right?
Yes, and the criteria are specific to our
Yeah. So
statutory.
yeah, it is
expulsion
just
criteria.
Wisconsin. Does that make sense?
Are you saying, Rob, if it's a student who now lives in Wisconsin, but within the last 2 years has been out of state and had disciplinary issues? Was that the question?
No, it was at the time frankly, if someone who was in Minnesota or anywhere else. So yeah, I misspoke. Certainly they have to be a resident of Wisconsin to open enroll.
Right.
Okay. Any other questions on any of these policies then? And of course, if board members get reading it further or whatever, you just need to get your suggestions in at least a week before, because we do want to do a first reading at our next action meeting, which would be July 13th. Is that correct, Andrea?
Yes.
Or Aaron? Okay. All right, very good. Well, with that, it's now 8:15, and we'll take a 5-minute break to 8:20, and we'll pick up with either budget or board assessment, either one. All right.
Ready when you are, Jamie. Heather, don't you think oranges are a little past season? I mean, we just bought clementines and they were less than flavorful. I don't know. You're muted.
The clementines I just ate were
Okay.
actually quite tasty.
Oh, really? Okay.
I learned a
All
new
right.
if you hold
All
down the
right.
space bar, you temporarily unmute yourself.
Yes.
All right, very good. I guess we'll go to the opportunity to distribute meals in July and August. Whose is that? Okay.
That's Tim Harris.
It would be me.
Okay.
So the USDA and DPI have approved, we have the opportunity to continue our seamless summer options programming for food distribution. So we looked at that, and I think, for us to be able to do that, we'd probably be able to just about break even with a small staff that would prepare food and get it ready for distribution. We do some deliveries. We had some volunteers do deliveries, and we had some large pack outs for larger families that we did. We would propose to start that back up in July 20th and run it through, I think we're authorized for the 31st of August. So that's what's on the table. I don't know if you have any questions. We did final counts for the COVID shutdown is we distributed about 58,000 meals. So
Nice.
Tim, how does that break down on a daily basis? How many kids or how many families are still getting food?
it varies quite a bit, Heather. We had, some days we would distribute about, on a high, probably about 1,300 meals. Other days it might be down into the 400s. It just depended on the day. And sometimes there were other, sometimes we were kind of competing with other programs. So it really, really did vary quite a bit.
Will this require an action on our part on July 13?
No, this would not require an action. We didn't, the reason we were hoping that DPI would have informed us prior to the last board meeting, but USDA was working through their process, and then DPI came out and just kind of confirmed it. And that's what we needed to have as a confirmation from DPI that we could still run under this program that normally we're not eligible to run.
Okay. Great. Any other questions then from board members? All right, hearing none.
Oh,
Why don't
Jamie,
you introduce?
I have my hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's
Okay.
all right. So Tim, you alluded
Sometimes the screen is freezing before your hand goes up, and so then I don't know your hand's up. Go ahead.
So Tim, you alluded to competition. Is there a way to better collaborate with like the lunch distribution happening at the Hudson YMCA, et cetera, so that we're, not duplicating and not wasting food on days that we're ready and then have less kids show up, or is that thoughts about that?
Yeah, we did some collaboration before, and that worked out well. And I think sometimes it's just tough for 2 or 3 different organizations. They have a little bit different needs to make everything work logistically. And so with what we're looking at, we probably try to do 1 to 2 distributions a week. That seems to pull in a number of people, so it's not an inconvenience to them to have to come in every day. That seemed to work out a little bit better, but yeah, and when we can, we do try to work with the other groups as well. We, obviously put their information on the website too, as to when they're having their meal distributions.
Great question, Rob.
Just out of curiosity, if we happen to have a day where we have a surplus of meals, what happens to those meals, Tim?
If we have a surplus, I think what we've been able to do a lot of times is those meals might be served up for on the next day. So they're packed. There's different packaging. We have different like bento boxes, which are individually packed meals. So some of that can be reused, not all of it. If the quality isn't good on that second day, then it doesn't get used. We do wind up having to throw some of it out. We've had a number, the numbers that sign up are a lot of times are a little higher than what actually show up, but that's kind of to be expected. Things change for families, and so we try to watch our numbers so we don't have a lot of waste.
Any other questions about the meals? Okay, I guess now we will move to budget then. Tim, why don't you introduce us to the 2021 budget?
Sure. So this is again, this first look at our preliminary budget, and I'm just gonna hit some highlights here. You can see the line for property taxes. They'd be in this proposed budget, they'd be at about a 2.4% increase. If we look at the section, which is a 600 series of revenue, most of that's state aid. All of those are state aid numbers. It tells a little bit of a story for us in that if we look at the numbers in the preliminary budget for 2021 compared to 1920, we're down about a little over $1 million in state aid, and by far the equalization aid, which is the 621 source code, is down 5.3%. So that's again been typical of the story for the last few years, is that we generally continue to see some shrinking aid there, but we continue to watch that. Some of the other areas, such as if you look at 699, which is other state revenue, that's our Department of Justice grants for mental health and safety and security, and those grants are going away. We're running those out. We're using those dollars, and so we won't have those available next time unless they create another program for it. And then, we're fairly stable in the federal revenues. Again, federal revenues are a very small source for a very small piece of the pie for us. So we're looking at about just about even a minus 0.3% decrease in our overall revenues. If we run down onto the expenditure side, the salaries and benefits, that does include, for point of discussion on this, that includes the 1% board approved, or the 1% increase that was proposed that you'll decide on this fall. And it also includes the compensation models intact. There's been no change to the performance pieces. So that is pretty close to what was proposed or what we had before. Open enrollment, if we look at both under the revenue side, open enrollment under 345, and then the open enrollment out 382 under the expenses, we think that is going to, I think our open enrollment in is going to go up slightly, and open enrollment out will go down slightly. So that's good news. Hopefully we're turning a corner there. That's based on most recent data back a few months ago from DPI. So we'll continue to monitor those numbers. Those numbers can change, and they do. And sometimes the people that are going to open enroll and fill out the application, we do have a number of those that decide not to go through with it for various reasons. But we're down, or we're actually up in the other purchase services. We've tried overall to hold our costs at a level, so no increase, but there are just some areas that, we could say no increase, but realistically, some things like utilities, we can't control that. We can control it only to a certain extent. So there are going to be some increases. But under the purchase services, we've got some increases there for transportation under the new transportation contract with Safeway, Wisconsin Virtual Schools for additional virtual programming with them. under the non-capital items, we have some decreases in that area, so that's good. That helps offset some of the increases. And some of the network equipment that we were purchasing, we did not have a need to have to purchase that for 2021. And then if we're looking, there was certain software that was invested in prior, and again, we won't have that investment again in 2021. So primarily the reason for the decrease there. Under number 500 capital objects, again, those expenditures were related mainly to the Department of Justice grant. So again, that grant will be fully completed, and we will have collected all of the monies in 2021 for that grant. So we won't have those expenditures ongoing. And so when we look at the different there's a various different transfers down at the bottom in the 800 series, and the one new one is interfund transfer to food service. So this coming year, 2021, as we project out their budget, that looks like we'll probably the general fund will need to cover a deficit of about $100,000 in food. And so we have expenses going up about 0.7%. This example. So that represents a break-even budget. And if we go back to the conversations we had about facility staffing and Andrea's discussion about staffing for buses and substitutes, et cetera, that does not include, this budget does not include any of that. That would be, we'd bring that forward as a separate piece. If we jump down to that bottom section under the committed and unassigned fund balance summary, you can see under the board committed fund balance for capital projects, that will be going down. Yes, we still have some contractors that have to be paid out as they get their correction work done. So we expect to have those completed. So that fund balance will go down to about 1.2 million. Self-funded health insurance will remain at the 1.95 for the reserve there. And then the projected unassigned fund balance, you know, as we talked about prior, we think we're going to add about $3.7 million to our fund balance for the end of this year, for the 19-20 year. So that projected unassigned fund balance would stand at about 22.3 million. And so that's actually about 1.9%, almost 2% higher than the board approved maximum of 30%. So, but again, it does set us up for the following biennium. So when you get into that biennium, that's where we think we're going to see very possibly a tough biennial budget. Of course, the state funds one of their the largest piece of state funding is for public schools, and it would be, you know, unless things were to turn around drastically, we do expect that there would be some type of adjustment to revenues for school districts. Either, you know, it could be in the way of per pupil aid, it could be in the way of a combination of different things and additional levy limits, that type of thing. So that's the first run through of the budget. Any questions on the budget?
Mr. President, Tim, I apologize.
Yes, Terry.
Tim, I apologize. You said you referenced Andrea with the substitutes, but I couldn't hear if you said, did this reflect the additional custodial staff that would need to be in place? No.
So
Okay.
Yeah, the budget does not include any of those things that we talked about.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
So one of the things that, you know, we've talked about is, as Tim alluded to, you know, we had a $3.7 million, we're projecting to finish the year very conservatively, about 3.7 million to the good this year. And it might be a little bit higher than that, but we think it's fair to say that. And Tim and Mark have done a great job on tracking all those things. And so if we do have a $600,000 expenditure in custodians or additional staff for subs or monitors, we feel like we're in a good position. And that's part of why, you know, at this point, we would say to the board, although your target is between 25 and 30%, it's all right going into this, building a budget around having a 31%, 31.68% fund balance. Because, you know, we could have the expense of the $600-some thousand worth of custodians. We could have some additional monitoring expenses. But then, which will kind of lead us into Tim's next document, which him and I spent a lot of time talking about, and it's not ready for prime time yet. This tool that Tim and Mark have created, which is a phenomenal tool, that allows you to kind of play with 3-year projections on, different scenarios and things like that. But the next item, and this is one of the things that we've talked about, and I've talked about in legislative updates, is there more than likely will be a budget repair bill, and what does that look like? And then what could that impact? And again, it may be a combination of state equalization aid and per pupil aid and things like that. But the best way we try to look at it is, if we cut funding per pupil, you'll have a variety of scenarios here. So I'll let Tim kind of run through those different things on the next document.
Okay, sure. So we lay this out with 3 or 4 different scenarios. And so the first one is under current law. And then we said, what happens if we had and in this case, we're using a per pupil aid reduction. We don't really know exactly what it might look like if they do a budget repair bill, but it could come in the way of a per pupil aid reduction. So we used 3 different levels there: $50, $250, and $500. The $500 scenario really equates to about 10% of our state aid. So that has happened a couple of times, specifically to Hudson when reductions were made at the state level during the recession, the Great Recession, and then a few years after that. So it's not totally out of the realm of possibility. But as we go through that, we left everything the same as the preliminary budget that you saw, but then just adjusted revenues down. So you can see that surplus, or the first example, it's a balanced budget. And then you can see the deficit, how that deficit grows with each one of those scenarios. Again, the estimated fund balance at the end of this year is $22,300,000. So then when you look at it as a balance, fund balance as a percentage of expenses, we're still, even in scenario number 4, without doing anything, you're still running at 27.73%. So that's still above the minimum of 25% on the board approved policy. If you look at the projected under levy, that is sitting at 3.8 million in the preliminary budget, and that's about $1 million higher than where it stands today. So again, that's good news, gives us some additional flexibility if needed. And that number going up is not all bad, especially going into a situation where we are right now. The mill rate would be projected to be $9.99 per 1,000, which is actually a 37-cent decrease, or 3.57% decrease over this current year. So even, this tells a little bit of a story that, as far as 2021 is concerned, if we're kind of weathering a storm, I think we're able to still remain pretty strong going into it without doing anything drastic. So that's good news. And this still assumes, when we look at these numbers, it still assumes a property value growth of about 6%. So I'll stop talking and take any questions that you've got.
Board members have questions? You have to audibly hand up. I can't see anybody's hand, so you're just gonna have to say your name and then.
Sue here.
All right, go ahead, Sue.
Yeah, Tim, do you want to conjecture which of these potential scenarios might be the one we'll be facing from all the back doors that you listen to at state legislature?
Wow. Well, I'd have to get out my crystal ball, and that broke a long time ago.
Okay.
I think, even, the lobbyist that Wisconsin School Districts uses, he doesn't really have a lot of information to share either at this point. Nick, as Nick mentioned, he's been talking to our representative, which is certainly helpful too. At this point, I'm not sure that I could pick any of those. It just, we'll have to see. One of the things that at the state level is with the tax extension, or the tax deadline extended into July, they're going to need to see what those numbers look like, and that won't be until probably August when they get that information. So we might see the wheels start to turn a little bit more and find out a little bit more what they're thinking, but they really have to get those numbers first.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other board members? I guess I'm thank you for the report, and I was expecting worse news, so that what sounds good is that we don't necessarily have to decide between giving the 1% raise that we've talked about in October and hiring janitors and bus monitors. Then we could do both, even in a scenario where it was $500 per student.
Yeah, I think we're in a good spot, Jamie, to weather this storm, and I think on top of that, we're not trying to do it on the backs of property taxpayers. We're trying to utilize funds that we already have. So I think it's a responsible budget. Tim and Mark have done a great job on it. The next budget could be the one that's a little bit more challenging, and that's just something to kind of keep in mind. Yeah, I think you guys you'll be in a good spot to be able to handle what they throw at us, both with COVID and budget reductions, and being able to give what people would, I think, say is a sensible, reasonable approach to a raise, and not being too over much. So,
Any other comments on the budget? I'm not hearing anybody, so I know that we've got at least 4 months. We know anywhere close what we're going to be on final numbers. At this time, I would entertain a motion to go into closed session, and please use the verbiage in the agenda. Heather?
Hold on, Jamie. Do you want to talk about the board self-assessment, or do you want to do that all in closed session, or what do you?
Oh, I'm sorry. I jumped ahead. I was getting a little excited because it was only 8:45. I figured it would be 9 before we get to that motion. I should have known. All right. Board self-assessment survey. Could you put that up, Tim, please? And all right, this was shared with the board, I think late last week. And what I was hoping to be able to do is, rather than pat ourselves in the back on those areas that we got close to 4s on, is just kind of focus on the areas that might be under 3. We got a couple that we were exactly at 3. But if there's board members that want to talk about other items, we can certainly do that. But I think in this first section, we actually do pretty good as far as data-driven decision-making. I think every one of these is over 3. So go ahead, Tim, if you want to scroll through, and if board members want to just state their name, and if there's a specific question you want to discuss or comment there, we can do that. If you want to get down to one that we're under a 3.
Mr. President?
Yes. There it is.
So I'm not sure
Yes,
what page I'm on, but it says we have an effective orientation process for new board members. I believe it's the first one where we are under 3.
Okay. There it is. All right. So, yeah, so any suggestions what we could do about getting that over a 3?
Well, I mean, I've been on the board now, gosh, I'm in my 6th year, which can't believe it's been that long. All fun, of course, but the orientation that, I went through with Nick's predecessor, I'm sure has changed quite a bit. And I've heard bits and pieces, from Heather and from Bob, excuse me, on some of the things they went through, but I'm just not aware of, is there a formal process? What does that look like? How is it different than what I went through and Sue went through? And so really it's nothing more than just probably a lack of understanding on my part.
Oh, so you're fessing up to being the one that gave us a 0 on that one?
Not a 0.
Mr. President?
Well, yeah, that was a not sure. So that's why it brought us down under a 3. Yes, Carrie.
Mr. President, I probably am the not sure. I would echo Rob's comments. That's kind of a skewed question, just because given the tenure of the board, we're not privy to the onboarding process. So most of the members, we can hear about it, but we haven't experienced it. So that's my comment.
This is
Okay.
Bob, and being the youngest one on the board, I will say it was traumatic an experience. No, as far as speaking of, Nick did a good job of meeting with me and explaining the process and what he hoped I would achieve from that. And that's meeting all the cabinet members. Had good conversations with all, except I will say that Tim was very unapproachable and we could not get something scheduled for a long time. No, but as far as my experience coming onto the board, I found the process to be what I was hoping for, what I would have expected. I don't know that there's a complete process down on paper for it, but I found it to be very helpful and very informative, and no complaints on that.
Well, and obviously, Bob, you must it was indulged in your brain because you didn't mention our trip to down to Pepin County down to Durand for the new school board members onboarding too.
That is correct.
Yeah, but Heather, you got your hand up. Go ahead, Heather.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we're having a similar conversation at work about this, and there's this like multi-layered thing where there's what you need to know about community foundations in general, and then what you need to know about our community foundation. And I think that, there's what you need to know about schools in Wisconsin in general that's not specific to Hudson necessarily, and then there's the Hudson specific stuff. And I don't know, I'm not a huge fan of like the binders that they used to hand people when they joined boards, here's your manual. But I do think like even things like if there was a glossary of acronyms, I think there are some materials like that could be helpful. But if they don't already exist, I don't know that it's the whole investment of staff time to develop something that's going to be changed in a year anyway. I don't know, but I don't know, just if there'd be a way to formalize it a little bit more with, because again, I don't think we have to recreate the wheel. I have to believe there are some of the materials you get at the new board member orientation in Durand or whatever, and then layered on that, really the understanding of how things work in our district. Because I would agree, my one-on-one with Nick and then subsequent meetings with cabinet members was really helpful, but it still is a bit overwhelming. So I don't know if there is a smallish orientation binder that could be put together or something like that.
And we can certainly look into that. I can go to, yes, Bob.
I would just say that some of the materials Dave gave me, I still have not read. That was the largest stack by far of any of the cabinet members. And I would
had a whole section on how to use your iPhone in there.
Thank you. I would agree with Heather that it is a lot to take in, and I don't want to forget to mention, as you mentioned, Jamie, that not only was Nick and the cabinet members very helpful, but I did gain a lot from the WASB stuff that I experienced too. I got more probably from just the discussions with individuals and getting to understand people's role and knowing them personally. So that was my biggest takeaway from that. You know, as far as the reading materials, yes, but probably not so much needed.
Jamie.
Right. And yeah, Rob, I was going to just follow on Bob's comment was as far as, and Heather's about getting to know the current board. Because I know what I did personally with Bob was actually about the same or a little bit more than what, Tom Holland and Lynn Robson. I mean, driving down to Durant and back, there's 2 hours in the car talking about specifically Hudson School Board stuff. And then on top of it, I've had been known to have a beverage with new board members and talk about stuff. So the fact that we got this 2.83 in a year where there was no new board members is a little confusing to me, because I could see if it happened in a year where we had 1 or 2 new board members, and the previous year there had, or 2 years there had been none. But since the previous 2 years there had been board members, new board members, now we're going down, even though there was no orientation conducted. But with that, Rob, you go ahead.
Thanks. If I remember correctly, I was one of the partially achieved, and maybe just an easy way of addressing this is if we have an effective orientation process or just a process in general, maybe there's a Google Drive folder or something where we can simply place this information so we all have access to what the process is, both with WASB as well as internally to the Hudson School District. If there's any collateral that might be, available, just as a grounding, that might be a nice resting place for all of that information, if you don't mind.
Agreed. All right, let's move on to the next one then.
I think it's the question about board
Okay.
committees.
Committees, right. And so we were all across the board here, not achieved or started at all as a 1, partially achieved 2, mostly achieved 1, fully achieved 3. And there is a comment that goes within, if you could, this one, you can scroll down to that one, Tim, the comment that was made, which, while I generally support the committee of the whole approach, I worry there are topics like financials which may not get the level of scrutiny they demand. And this is, our 6th year of doing self-assessments. It's our 5th year of getting away, 4th year, full year of getting away from committees and going to the committee of the whole. And so I'm open to what do people want to do? I mean, if we need a refresher course of why we went to the committee of the whole, we can do that. But if there's a great call and we got 4 board members that want to go back to individual committees and go back to the way it was, we can certainly do that if people think that that's a more effective way of doing stuff.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Having experienced separate committee topics and attending those meetings, I much prefer, though not the length of the action item meetings and the work session meetings, I definitely prefer this format versus the committee meetings.
I would agree with Carrie.
And Bruce, you're the other one that would have been.
Yeah.
Do you have a preference?
No, I agree with it. And I also think it's a difficult question to think about, because board committees, we also have appointed committees, right? So we choose to use those at various times as well. And I think that those are used effectively and used at points in which we deem them necessary. So I think the committee as a whole, because everyone stays informed. There's less meetings, benefits all the way around, and those at times appointed committees I think also are used effectively when they're needed.
And having served on that finance committee when it was just a finance committee, they got no more detail in that meeting than what we get now when we talk finances, like when Tim just gave his report about the budget. We get just as detailed. Now, this may dovetail with another discussion about whether our meetings overall are effective, because I think we're under a 3 on that one as well. But part of that may be my fault because I don't have a gavel now since we started these virtual meetings, and I don't cut people off. But if that's what folks want, is a working session that is more chop and done in 2 hours, I can certainly accommodate that. If there's a call for people to start cutting off debate, I've seen some boards go to an item where you get 1 comment per board member per agenda item. And if we did that, I think our meetings would definitely be done in under 2.5 hours.
Maybe.
Jamie, I would just say, when I think about effective meetings, I don't think about length. I think about, was it worth the time I put into it? I have no problem with a 4-hour meeting if I feel like it was a really good use of our time. So I don't think length of meeting should be the measure of our effectiveness. I think there's I mean, it's part of it, but I think that it's a larger question about the combination of length and what did you actually do at the meeting. So I, for one, would not want you to start cutting people off more than you do already. I think it's more the, are we talking about the right stuff?
Wholeheartedly agree with Heather.
Okay. All right. And then Sue?
I just
Did you have something?
I was also part of the individual committee meetings, on Monday and Tuesday or whatever they were. And us all meeting together collectively is a much better use of our time. And I started, like some others, going Tuesday and Monday night because I knew that finances, for example, was one of my weaker areas. So I always went anyway to those other committees if I wasn't on them. So yeah, this is a much better way. And then we get to know each other better this way too.
Gary?
Okay.
Thank you. I
Yes.
do think like the construction subcommittee was very effective, but harkening back to the previous format, administrators would also have to duplicate their presentations for different subgroups, and it's a better use of their time as well.
Okay. Any further discussion about this on the board committees? All right. I think there was another one in this section that was below a 3. There it is. All right. And it says evaluate the superintendent at least annually against clear goals and with performance criteria, which includes measures of student achievement. I think we do have annual, and then this last year, I think that we had a mid-year update. I think without getting into specifics on goals and performance criteria, I kind of think overall we tend to do that, but this may be a better discussion that we'll have in closed session, because we've got board members that believe that we do have goals for our superintendent, and we've got some that say we are not started or not achieved at all. So generally, as to process, what are folks thinking there?
Jamie, I guess I'd agree with you that maybe we should have a deeper discussion in closed session on this. As far as thoughts and everything else, I think it'll build upon itself, and likely, a better spot would be closed session.
Okay. All right. So we'll moving on then. This is another area we got when we get a not sure. That's where I think it brings the the average down, but we've got a few partially received, so we're going to probably talk about this more in closed session. Next one, Tim.
I think it's all the way down in community engagement.
Okay. And this one isn't that far below a 3, but it's just, we regularly communicate our financial needs to the public in an easy to understand format. And if there's a way of us improving that, I think we're already posting our budgets. Do our financial updates, Nick, do those get posted?
The financial update is part of the board agenda. It's attached, so everybody can look at it. But I think one of the things that we definitely could do better, and we've talked about this multiple times, is more articles and maybe our newsletters and things like that about, kind of priming the pump prior to needing to go, not just talking about our financials with the general public when we need to go to referendum, but trying to spend a little bit more time being proactive on it. So I think it's something that we can definitely work on, and I think hopefully get to a point where board members feel like we're either mostly achieving or fully achieving those things.
Okay.
Jamie, I was one of those that I think ranked us as a partially achieved, not because we're not doing a good job, the district's not doing a good job. It's just the ability, if you will, of the public to just readily find, or actually the district being proactive with that communication to the public on where we're at financially. Certainly anybody could go and look up, a public record or, call the district, but that takes effort on their part and they don't know what they don't know. So if there was a way for us to, I think to Nick's point, do a better job of being more proactive with that communication, that was the only reason why I ranked this as partially achieved.
I also just think, I don't know how you, in an easy to understand format, communicate school financials. I'm not even sure that's possible. You look at the time that we've all put into trying to get our arms around the complicated way that Wisconsin funds schools. So I'm not even sure that I could ever imagine a time when I would give us a 4 on this, because I'm not sure it's achievable, just because it's a big challenge.
Can I get an amen?
Amen. Definite amen there. Is that the last one?
Oh, I think there's one on vision or something. Say on the financials, maybe, for me, visuals are always helpful, and diagrams, that kind of thing. And maybe we could just occasionally include a topic in our newsletter, like, one of the line items, explain one of the line items of how we cover the cost for our children's education or something. I think most people in the community don't really understand how we fund education. Because when I see things on Facebook or hear from people, they always begin with their assumption. And first of all, you have to deal with their assumption about financials or, whatever else we're doing in our school district. And so they have some kind of funny assumption, and it has nothing to do with how we're handling something in a successful way.
Following up on Sue's point, maybe a visual with amount dedicated to student funding would be amount funded toward other aspects of our life, housing, boating, vacations, whatever, college funds. But maybe that would just kind of put things in a different perspective.
Yeah, we can definitely work on some of those things, and maybe even create like a did you know column in our newsletter as it relates to, financing. Did you know that we travel how many millions of miles a year just to get kids to school, and that cost us X number of dollars? Or did you know we, spend this much money just to turn the lights on? I mean, so I think some of those things we can absolutely kind of work on to put it in perspective. Um, for folks, and we kind of, Tracy and I and Tim can kind of brainstorm on that, what could be a good way to get some of those things across. The other ones, I think, Jamie, that were below a 3 primarily dealt with legislative type of issues and
Right. Yeah, and I think that's another one where I think we've reached out. You can lead a horse to water, you can't make him drink. We've invited these guys. I think maybe letting us know when you've invited Patty and or Shannon Zimmerman. That way board members are aware that the invite was sent. That helps. And I'm always open to adding this to an agenda if there are. I mean, we have done in the past, added legislative things and discussed. We had that proposal for a resolution down at WASB that didn't go so well, but I mean, we've been a little bit more active than maybe some past years, but there's still.
This is actually trending upward. When you look at the past years, we're actually, even though we're below a 3, we're in better shape than we were, 5 years ago. We were borderline below a 2. And so, we're trending in a good direction. But I think it is definitely something that we can be more intentional about letting when we have legislators in buildings, because we do, Senator Shackner, Representative Zimmerman, they're in our buildings multiple times a year for a variety of things. And so we can kind of do a better job of filling you in on when those things are taking place and what's going on.
Well, and to your point, Jamie, when I read we on this survey, I don't read Nick or the district, I read the board. So I mean, to me, if I was going to say yes to we communicate, that would be me saying yes, we the board communicate, not yes, we the district through Nick communicate. So maybe I'm reading this wrong, but that's how I've been interpreting the questions is about the board, not the district.
Absolutely.
Okay. Any other comments on this one? All right. Well, thank you for the screen share, Tim. And we'll now go to closed session using the language in the motion.
I'm sorry, before we break, we didn't talk about one that I was actually the most interested in, that last question about board presence at community events.
Okay.
Because that is something that I wonder about a lot, is that, it doesn't feel to me like, aside from graduation and kind of the welcome for teachers, that there's kind of an intentional effort for us to, as a board, make ourselves kind of known and available and present in the community, which I don't know, is something that I would like more of, but maybe that's just me.
I don't know. Nick, do you have any suggestions there? I mean, in other districts, do board members attend events and then get recognition as being there as a board? Or is it, pretty much up to individual board members to go to the basketball games, the plays, the concerts, and so forth?
One of the things I've seen boards do, and it's quite nice, that at the beginning of the meeting, they, kind of give a recap of maybe anything they've attended or events that they've been to, things that they thought went really well about the district. And so board members are more cognizant of, what people are going to and what that looks like. So that, they might say, hey, over the weekend, I went to the musical and it was really good. Or, I attended the first home football game, or, and things like that. And just kind of a recap of, each board member given an opportunity to say, here's some of the things they did, related to our district. Here's some of the things they saw, just kind of an FYI. And I think almost what it does, it starts to put a little bit of peer pressure maybe on people to say, okay, I'm going to make a conscientious effort to get to X, Y, or Z. And as a district, I mean, we can do a better job of inviting to things. But, as as Heather said, I mean, all of our stuff is going to be on the website. I mean, it's, whatever people want to attend, they absolutely can do that. If they want us to announce when they're there, we're more than happy to do that as well. Say tonight we have, but I mean, we absolutely can do those things. I know Sue thrives on that kind of thing, especially at home football games. But I mean, yeah, we're open to whatever you want to do. But the thing I've seen boards do is really just kind of talk about events or activities they were at since the last board meeting. And
I think I think that's a great idea. And we kind of got away from that board president report, but maybe if we start maybe replace that president report with just a board report in general of involvement or presence in the community. Because we have, though, in the past, I mean, Sue has mentioned when she's attended, event at Holton School, whether it was regarding the gardens or something related to, promotion of art. And we've had other board members talk about the concerts and the plays they've attended. So I think that would be a very good idea that we communicate that. It's just getting that known out there. And like you said, creating a little bit of more peer pressure. I've been wanting to get to a wrestling match. I get to the basketball and the volleyball and the football, but an occasional baseball game, but I need more of the other sports as well. And so anyway, and the academic, I'd love to go to a debate or, public speaking event, whether it was, related to DECA or FFA or something like that. So if we could is it possible to get something that is on a monthly basis? These are the things happening in the district, if board members are interested.
I mean, I can give you a link to the calendar. Absolutely, I can do it, but it'd be creating another document that basically already exists if you just would go to the webpage and it shows everything that we have going on in the district. I mean, I can do it if that's what you guys want to do, but the problem is I give you that and it's not going to be as up to date as what's on the website because Tracy keeps that in real time if there's changes.
Well, I think that, we do have to have some responsibility as board members. So, okay. I'm sorry, I didn't.
Jamie, I think the other part of that is, it's the district and community events. And this really, this came to mind most recently when we were all contacted by the organizer of that march, right? And inviting us to be there, which, two questions. One is that whole, and Jamie, you talked about it, the not being ready to speak as a board member, but I think there are community events where probably the community would almost expect / appreciate knowing that someone from the board was interested in attending. And so I don't know how those are harder to monitor because they're not organized by the district, but I think, that's another thing to be mindful of. And Nick, maybe, because, some of the events that you get invited to as an administrator, and maybe there are some of those either that you can't attend or that you feel like it would be good for a board member to be there. It's a fine line because you're not there to speak for the board. And yet I think the community sometimes notices if no one from the board is there. So I don't know.
Absolutely.
Any other comments about the assessment? All right, if you could take that down, Tim, and I guess we're going to entertain the motion. I think we have.
And then you'll go into the new meeting that I sent you a link to. So I'll go ahead. I'm going to get out of this meeting and start that meeting so you guys are ready to go. But you go ahead and do your motions.
All right. Well, and before we do the motion, I wanted to be able to also give board members the opportunity to say something. We have one of our cabinet members. This is their last meeting. And so I want to thank Sandy for all your work over the years, your dedication, your loyalty, and your commitment to student learning has been outstanding. And we really appreciate your contributions. You're going to be immensely missed. And I want to open it up to other board members, anybody else that also wants to express their appreciation.
Well, is Carrie going to sing or anything like that? Well, Sandy, I sent you a note, to your mailbox. but really, I think that you have been an excellent member of this cabinet, and you all work as a fine team. You're a well-oiled machine, so to speak. And I appreciate you've contributed so much to the growth and development of teaching and learning, and probably have served as a mentor to many of the educational coaches. So thank you, and I hope you can do some travel, which is probably now on hold. But thank you very much.
Well, Sandy, thank you very much for
Rob?
your contributions and gosh, just everything you've done. But certainly we have a lot of people here that want to sing your praises. What plans do you have immediately after retiring? Anything fun?
Pretty much heading north. We have the Lindemann. My maiden name's Lindemann. We have a family cabin up in Spooner, so I'm heading there. We're supposed to be on a trip, like Sue had said, in September. That'll be now September 21. And then we have our first wedding in October. So our son in Milwaukee is getting married. So that'll take my next few months.
You know, it's funny about administrators. They go into retirement, and then a year or so later, they fail at retirement. They get back into education because they miss it. Hopefully you don't fail at retirement.
We're also looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Hopefully you got a nice speech prepared for tomorrow.
I'll work on that yet tonight.
Anyone else?
Mr. President?
All right. Well, yes.
Mr. President?
Carrie.
Well, Sandy, since Sue brought it up, what comes to mind is the Rolling Stones, You Can't Always Get What You Want, which I will not be singing, but hopefully as time progresses, as retirement progresses, you do get to see and realize all the things that you'd like. So best of luck to you, and thank you for all your service, your many years of service.
Thank you.
Very much appreciated.
Absolutely. Hear, hear. All right.
Sandy, I'll sing in and see you tomorrow.
Okay.
Thank you so much for we've spent a lot of time before the board, even on junior achievement. So I've always enjoyed working with you, but I'll see you tomorrow afternoon.
Okay.
I won't be able to see you tomorrow, Sandy, as I am still essential, and I'm trying to get my hours in so I can go up through Spooner on my way to Minocqua over the holidays here. But I've obviously listened to you speak many times, more as a audience member at school board meetings than as a board member, probably. But it's been a pleasure. I've always thought that you had what was best in the best interest of our district, our students, and our staff. So thank you very much for your years.
Thank you.
All right. With that, I would entertain then a motion to go into closed session. We have two parts to the motion. Please read the whole thing.
I'll do it. I move pursuant to Wisconsin statute 19.85 parent 1 parent C to consider the employment, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any administrative and or professional employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, and to convene in closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statute 19.85 parent 1 parent F to consider financial or personal histories or disciplinary data of specific persons, preliminary consideration of specific personnel problems, or the investigation of charges against specific persons which, if discussed in public, would likely to have a substantial adverse effect upon the reputation of any person referred to in such histories or data or involved in such problems or investigations.
Second.
All right. It requires a roll call vote. I'll start with Heather.
Aye.
Carrie.
Aye.
Katas.
Aye.
Right. Bauman.
Aye.
Brown.
Yes.
Hanson.
Aye.
And Johnson, aye. The motion carries. We'll now convene in closed session. The board will go to the new I guess, link for that session. And thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.